Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Last Stop at Dusk. The headlights of my car sliced through the darkness like a blade, illuminating the winding road ahead as I navigated through the vast emptiness. I had been driving for hours, a solitary figure in an expanse of nothingness, the radio crackling with static and the occasional ghost of an old country tune. I hadn't seen another vehicle in what felt like an eternity, and the isolation weighed heavily on my chest. When the gas gauge dipped dangerously close to empty, I spotted a flickering neon sign in the distance, the word gas glowing intermittently, as if it were struggling to stay alive. A sense of relief washed over me, mixed with a budding unease. I pulled into the gravel lot, the crunch of stones beneath my tires an unwelcome sound in the desolation. The gas station was old, its paint peeling and faded, but it was a refuge in the bleak landscape. I stepped out of my car, the night air cool against my skin, and looked around. Only the distant hum of the wind and the soft rustle of leaves filled the silence. No other cars, no lights from a nearby house, just me and this solitary gas station. I approached the pumps, and as I began to fill my tank, I glanced around, taking in the dimly lit convenience store attached to the station. It seemed to sag under the weight of time, the flickering fluorescent lights casting an eerie glow. I finished fueling and walked inside, the door creaking ominously as it swung open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and something metallic. The shelves were stocked haphazardly, filled with day-old snacks and cheap trinkets, but what caught my attention was the attendant. He stood behind the counter, a tall figure with unkempt hair and a face that bore the marks of too many sleepless nights. His eyes, dark and cavernous, bore into me as I approached. "Evenin'," he said, his voice a gravelly drawl. "Traveling far?" "Just passing through," I replied, my throat suddenly dry. "Late night drives can be lonely, huh?" He leaned forward, elbows on the counter, a predatory glint in his eyes. "Where you headed?" I felt a pang of discomfort at his invasive tone. "Just visiting some friends," I said, attempting to keep my answers vague. "Friends, huh? Nice to have some company on the road. But what about the road back? You know, it's not safe out there at night." He chuckled, but it was devoid of humor, more a rasp of warning. I forced a smile, clearing my throat. "I'll be fine. Just a quick stop and I'll be on my way." His gaze did not relent. "You sure? Folks don't always show up when they say they will. Sometimes they end up." He paused, letting the silence stretch. I felt the chill of his words wrap around me like a vine, tightening as I tried to shake it off. "Sometimes they end up where?" I asked, the question slipping from my lips before I could stop myself. "Nowhere good," he replied, the corner of his mouth curling into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're traveling alone? In a place like this? That's brave." I shifted my weight, the floorboards creaking beneath me. "I just needed to refuel." "Refueling is important, sure," he said, leaning back now but keeping his eyes trained on me. "But you know, in this part of town, it helps to be prepared for more than just a full tank." The lights above us flickered violently, plunging the store into momentary darkness before they steadied. I could feel my heart racing, a wild drum in my chest. There was something unnerving about his demeanor, the way he seemed to relish this unease he was cultivating. I glanced at the door, weighing my options for an escape. "Can I grab a drink?" I gestured toward a cooler at the back of the store. "Sure thing," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "But don't wander too far. It's a big place, and who knows what could be lurking in the shadows." I grabbed a bottle of water, the coldness biting into my palm, and hurried back to the counter. "How much?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just keep it," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "This gas station's got what you need, but you can't always count on it being there." I frowned, unsure of how to respond. "Thanks," I mumbled, feeling more exposed with each passing second. "Listen," he said, leaning closer again, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "You should really think about your plans. Late-night drives and strangers don't mix well." I glanced back at the door once more, the sense of dread coiling tighter. "I really should be going," I said, my tone sharper than intended. He straightened, a flicker of surprise crossing his features before he leaned back against the counter again. "You think they'd care if you disappeared? People don't look for those who vanish out in the sticks." The lights flickered again, this time a more ominous buzz accompanying it. I took a step back, my instinct screaming at me to leave this place behind, to drive back into the safety of the night. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked, a tremor in my voice. "Just trying to help," he replied, a hint of annoyance breaking through his calm facade. "Just don't forget your plans." I nodded, feigning confidence as I turned toward the door. "Thanks for the advice." "Yeah, you take care now," he called after me, his voice trailing off into a smirk. I pushed the door open, feeling the weight of his gaze on my back as I stepped outside. I could feel myself moving faster now, my heart racing with every step toward my car. I fumbled for my keys, my hand shaking as I tried to steady myself. With a quick glance back at the gas station, I noticed the attendant still watching, eyes gleaming in the dark. As I climbed into my car, I could still hear his voice echoing in my mind, the words twisting like a dark vine wrapping itself around my thoughts. The engine roared to life, and I pulled away, the gravel crunching beneath my tires, but the sense of foreboding lingered, shrouding me as I drove off into the night. The fluorescent lights flickered above me, casting eerie shadows across the cracked linoleum floor of the gas station. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the corner, a low drone that only seemed to amplify the emptiness surrounding me. The clerk, a wiry man with unkempt hair and eyes that seemed to dart in every direction, stood behind the counter, watching me with a strange intensity that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I had just come off the highway, my car weary from the long drive, the tires still singing the song of asphalt beneath them. The gas station was as desolate as I had feared, a lone structure surrounded by swathes of darkness, with only the distant flicker of stars above and the occasional rustle of wind to keep it company. My plan was simple: fill up the tank, grab a snack, and get back on the road. But now, as I stood there in front of the counter, that plan felt more like a descent into a surreal nightmare. "Need anything else?" he asked, a crooked smile stretching across his face. The way he leaned closer over the counter made my stomach churn. "Just the gas, thanks," I replied, unable to mask the tremor in my voice. I paid him, my fingers brushing against his as I passed the cash. The touch sent a shiver down my spine. He counted the money slowly, his eyes darting to the door as if he were waiting for someone. "You traveling far?" he asked, tilting his head, his smile never wavering. "Just heading to the next town over," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I've got a place waiting for me." "Out here?" He leaned back, his expression changing to one of amusement mixed with something darker. "Not many places out here to stay, you know. Most people just drive through." I shrugged, trying to convince myself that he was just making conversation. "It's a small town. Family business." He nodded, but his gaze didn't waver. "You got anyone waiting for you? Family? Friends?" I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "No. Just me." His eyes flickered momentarily, and I caught a glimpse of disappointment, or was it curiosity? "Oh, just you then." all alone in the dark. The lights dimmed again, and I glanced around, unnerved. The isolated gas station felt increasingly claustrophobic, with shadows creeping closer as if they were alive. "I should get going," I said, trying to keep my tone light. Sure," he replied too quickly, his voice a little too eager. "But don't you want to stay a while? Chat? I mean, it's not often I get someone like you here." I forced a smile, backing away slightly. "Really, I'm fine. Just need to." "Just need to what?" he interrupted, eyes narrowing. "Get back on the road? You know, it's not safe out there at night. Lots of things lurking in the shadows. You never know who or what you might run into." "Yeah, I guess." I tried to keep my tone neutral, but my heart raced. I grabbed my drink and chips, clutching them tightly as if they were a shield. "But I'll be fine." "Sure you will." His voice was low, almost conspiratorial. "Just be careful. The world isn't as friendly as it seems, you know." The lights flickered again, and this time I could hear a faint rumble outside, like thunder rolling in the distance. My instinct screamed at me to leave, yet my feet felt like they were glued to the floor. "What's your name?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence that had stretched uncomfortably between us. "Ah, Sarah," I replied, swallowing hard. "And you?" "Just call me Ray," he said, leaning closer. "Sarah. Nice name for a nice girl." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "Thanks. I really should." "Hey, no need to rush." "I've got all night," he said, a smirk creeping onto his lips. "You don't have to pretend with me. It's a quiet night, just you and me out here. I promise I won't bite." His laughter was unsettling, reverberating in the stillness of the gas station. The fridge hummed loudly, the noise punctuating the tension. I glanced at the door, wondering if it would be inappropriate to run. "Are you from around here?" he asked, tilting his head again, the flickering lights casting a stark shadow across his features. "No, just passing through," I replied, trying to maintain my composure. "Passing through." He echoed my words, his smile fading slightly. "You know, people come through here for lots of reasons. Some looking for gas. Others looking for something else. Really, I should go." I took a step back, my heart racing as I felt trapped in his gaze. "Why don't you tell me more about this family business?" His eyes glimmered with something unnameable, a hint of hunger. "What does your family do?" A sense of foreboding thickened the air. "It's nothing interesting. Just a store." "Oh, I think it might be interesting." "What kind of store?" I felt cornered, the walls of the gas station closing in on me. Just a store," he interrupted, the smile returning to his lips. "Everyone's got a story, Sarah. What's yours?" Just as the flickering lights dimmed again, plunging the gas station into momentary darkness, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The sudden noise startled me, and I pulled it out, my hand shaking. It was a text from my sister, asking if I had made it to my destination yet. "Must be nice to have someone waiting for you," Ray said, and I could feel his gaze boring into me. As I glanced back up, my heart skipped a beat. The door had closed on its own, locking me in with him. "Let me go!" I snapped, my voice rising, panic bubbling to the surface. Why would I want to do that? His smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed almost too sharp. Then the lights flickered one last time before plunging us into darkness, a silence thick as the night outside enveloping us. I took a deep breath, preparing to make my move. I had to get out before it was too late. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a constant reminder that I was no longer on the open road. The gas station was a small, weather-beaten structure surrounded by darkness, its singular glow a beacon in the desolation. I had driven for hours, my car's interior filled with the remnants of fast food wrappers and the fading smell of stale coffee. I had hoped to make it to a motel before nightfall, but the winding roads had betrayed me. As I stepped inside, warm air enveloped me like a blanket, but it was tainted with the scent of oil and old cigarettes. My eyes darted around the cramped interior, scanning the shelves cluttered with snacks and drinks barely touched by anyone. I made my way to the counter, where the attendant stood, his back turned to me. "Just a minute," he called, his voice gravelly. I noticed the way his shirt clung to his back, damp from the heat. He turned to face me, and I caught the faint outline of his face beneath a cap that cast a shadow over his features. "What can I get for you?" "I just need to fill up and grab a drink," I replied, trying to sound casual. My heart beat a little faster as I considered the isolation of the place. He nodded, then gestured toward the gas pumps outside. "You'll want to take pump 3. It's the only one that works right now." I glanced through the glass door to see the flickering light above the designated pump, casting strange shadows on the asphalt. "Thanks," I said, turning to leave. As I stepped back outside, I felt the chill creeping into my bones. The night stretched endlessly around me, the stars hidden behind a thick veil of clouds. I filled my tank, glancing back at the station now and then. The attendant watched me from the window, his expression unreadable. When I returned inside, my hands trembling slightly from the cold, I felt the weight of his gaze heavy on me. He was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching me like a hawk. "Where are you headed?" "Around," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just trying to get to the next town." He took a step closer, the fluorescent lights casting an eerie glow across his features. "What's in the next town?" "Family? Friends? Just a place to rest for the night," I said, the unease settling in my stomach. "Oh, this late?" His eyebrows knitted together, a hint of concern in his voice. "You sure? Seems dangerous out here." "It's fine, really. I've done this drive plenty of times before." I tried to dismiss his worry, but I felt exposed under his scrutiny. "It's just that people don't usually stop here at this hour," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "They're scared." "Scared?" I asked, my curiosity piqued despite the unease blossoming within me. "Of what could be out there?" He gestured toward the darkness beyond the glass door. "You never know who you might run into." I felt the back of my neck prickle as I shifted from foot to foot, suddenly aware of how alone I was. "I'll be fine," I insisted, trying to sound braver than I felt. His expression shifted, a smirk crept onto his face. "You don't have to worry. I'm just here to help. But sometimes, help comes in unexpected ways." "Right." I chuckled nervously, but the sound felt hollow in the silence. I glanced at my watch. Almost midnight. I really should get going. He leaned in closer, and I caught the smell of sweat mingling with something like decay. "Don't you want to know what makes this gas station special?" "What?" I couldn't help but ask, despite the instinct to back away. "They say if you're not careful, you might meet someone who never left." His tone was teasing, but there was an edge of something darker behind it, as if he derived pleasure from my discomfort. "Okay," I said slowly, backing away from the counter. "I think I'll..." Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the room into shadow before illuminating again. The attendant's eyes glinted in the half-light. "You don't want to be wandering out there too late. The road can play tricks on you." I forced a smile, grabbing a bottle of water from the shelf. I really don't need anything else. Not even a snack for the road? His voice was low, almost seductive, as he reached toward a rack filled with candy bars. No, I'm good, I replied, my voice cracking slightly. The hairs on my arms stood on end. Suit yourself. He straightened up, crossing his arms again, a predator watching its prey. But if you change your mind, I'll be right here, waiting. I hurried to the register, forcing myself to meet his gaze, paying for the drink with trembling hands. The moment I was done, I turned to leave, eager to escape his presence, but he called out once more. Drive safe. You never know what's lurking in the dark. I stepped back outside, the night air wrapping around me like a dark shroud. I glanced back at the gas station, the flickering lights casting an unnatural glow. Was it just the bulbs failing, or something more sinister? As I climbed into my car, I locked the doors and took a deep breath. The engine roared to life, but something felt off. Despite the attendant's warnings echoing in my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just being watched from the gas station. It was as if the very night itself was alive, breathing and lurking, waiting for me to make a mistake. The air felt heavy, thick with the kind of stillness that could swallow sounds whole. I stepped out of my car and took a deep breath, inhaling the faint whiff of gasoline mingled with the scent of damp earth. The moon hung high above me, casting an eerie glow over the cracked asphalt of the gas station parking lot. I was in the middle of nowhere, and the isolation wrapped around me like a heavy shroud. The gas station was a decrepit relic, its fluorescent lights buzzing sporadically, casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls of the small structure. The glass door slid open with a creak that seemed to echo into the void. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed a tired tune, illuminating shelves lined with snacks long past their expiration dates and a refrigerator stocked with questionable beverages. The attendant stood behind the counter, a gaunt man with sunken cheeks and a peculiar smile that felt more like a grimace. His eyes were dark, too dark, as if they held secrets I wasn't prepared to uncover. I forced a smile and approached, the sound of my footsteps feeling painfully loud in the silence. Fill her up, he asked, his voice low and gravelly, like the gravel underfoot. Just the pump, thanks, I replied, trying to keep my tone light. I've got a long way to go. Where you headed? He inquired, leaning forward, elbows resting on the counter. Just passing through, I said, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck prickling. Visiting family. Ah, family. Always good to see family, he said with a strange intensity, his fingers drumming against the counter. What about the road? Any trouble? I shrugged, glancing out the window. The night was dark, devoid of movement except for the occasional rustle of leaves and the gentle breeze. Just the thought of slipping back into the silence made me uneasy. Just the usual late-night driving, I said, trying to brush off his probing questions. It's fine. Fine, sure. You know what they say about these roads at night, he said, his smile fading as he leaned closer. Strange things happen out there. People go missing. Cars break down. You ever heard of that? His tone shifted, and I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. I forced a laugh, the sound hollow. I think that's just stories. Oh, they're more than stories, trust me, he pressed, his eyes boring into mine. The flickering lights cast unsettling shadows across his face, and I took a step back, feeling trapped by an invisible weight. I began, but he interrupted me. Your license plate, it's from far away, isn't it? He tilted his head, his smile returning but with a chilling edge. What brings you to these parts? I shifted my weight, glancing toward the door. Just visiting some friends, really. Friends, huh, he said, his voice dripping with intrigue. That's interesting. You know what else is interesting? the last woman who stopped here. She had friends too. Just like you. Only she never made it to see them. I forced a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. I'm sure she's fine. Sure, he replied, but his eyes never left mine. But tell me, what do you think happened? Out there on those lonely roads? I felt sweat trickling down my spine. I don't know, I whispered, taking another tentative step back. I really need to get going. The lights flickered again, this time plunging the gas station into semi-darkness, and I felt a chill creep past me, as though the shadows themselves were alive. The attendant seemed unfazed, his gaze steady, and in that moment, I realized there was something deeply unsettling about the way he watched me, like I was a piece on a chessboard, and he had all the time in the world to plan his next move. You know, he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, the road can be a dangerous place. But you know what's more dangerous? The people you meet along the way. Right, I said, forcing a laugh that died in my throat as he stepped around the counter, his movements slow and deliberate, making it impossible for me to turn back toward the exit without drawing attention. I really have to go. Stay a while, he said, his tone almost pleasant now, masking the menace behind it. You could use a friend, don't you think? I shook my head, panic clawing at my insides. My car waited outside like a lifeline, but the thought of getting trapped in conversation with him suffocated me. I edged toward the door, my palms clammy against the cool metal of the handle. Don't be rude, he said, his voice low, the friendly facade slipping away. It's not often we get company out here. You wouldn't want to be just another story, would you? Those words struck deep, rattling my resolve. I yanked the door open and bolted outside, my heart racing in my chest. The night air hit me like a wave, flooding my senses with the acrid scent of gasoline and dirt. I sprinted toward my car, fumbling for my keys as the lights flickered once more, plunging the gas station into deeper shadows. I could sense him watching me, his presence looming like a dark cloud behind me. I didn't dare look back. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into gear, tires screeching as I peeled out of the parking lot, the gas station shrinking in the rearview mirror. But the image of that man remained etched in my mind, his chilling smile and the palpable dread he inspired lingering like an unwelcome shadow, a reminder that in the quiet corners of night, darkness could take many forms. The flickering lights overhead buzzed like a swarm of angry bees, casting erratic shadows that danced across the grimy tiles of the gas station floor. I stood by the pump, clutching the handle, my breath misting in the cold night air, unsure whether the chill stemmed from the temperature or a creeping sense of dread. The road had been long, winding endlessly through desolate stretches of countryside, and I was thankful for the momentary respite, even if it was at this forsaken pit stop. I hadn't seen another car for miles, and the digital clock on the pump blinked a relentless 2:13 a.m. I glanced back at the gas station. The glass door swung open, and the attendant emerged, a thin man with angular features obscured by the dim light. He wore a faded uniform that hung loosely on his frame, and the name tag, something generic like Chuck, was smudged and barely legible. "Need any help?" he called, his voice gravelly yet edged with an unsettling eagerness. I shook my head, hastily withdrawing my gaze from his piercing blue eyes that seemed to undress me with every glance. I turned my attention to the gas pump. It was slow, the green numbers ticking up as I attempted to focus on anything but the presence of the man watching me. After a few moments, he approached, casually leaning against the side of the pump. He rubbed his hands together, the gesture making a sickening sort of sense, as though he were preparing for some malevolent task. "Long way from home?" he asked, tilting his head. The question caught me off guard. "Just a road trip," I replied, attempting a casual tone. "Visiting some friends." "What friends?" he insisted, his eyes narrowing slightly, a predatory glint surfacing beneath his inquisitive facade. I hesitated, feeling the sudden weight of his scrutiny. My friends were none of his business. Just some college buddies, I mumbled, feeling foolish for disclosing even that much. He nodded, but didn't seem satisfied. The gas pump clicked, signaling that I was done. I replaced the nozzle and walked toward the station's entrance, eager to pay and leave. The lights flickered again, a little longer this time, plunging the station into near darkness before returning to their sickly hum. I shivered, a sense of foreboding coiling tightly around my chest. Inside, the fluorescent lights were harsh and unflattering, illuminating the cluttered shelves lined with outdated snacks and sodas. "Hey there, you want anything?" Chuck called out, a little too chipper for such an hour. I approached the register, anxiously tapping my card against my palm. "Just gas," I said, avoiding his gaze. He leaned over the counter, his expression shifting from curiosity to something more sinister. "Where are you headed?" I felt trapped. The way he scrutinized me made me feel like a specimen under a microscope. "Just passing through," I said, biting off the edge of my words. He nodded slowly, a grin creeping along his lips. "Ain't much out here, you know. Just road and darkness. Why not take a break? Stay the night?" His voice had taken on a conspiratorial tone, as if he were inviting me into some twisted secret. "No thanks," I replied firmly, a hint of irritation creeping into my voice. Chuck straightened, a flicker of disappointment flashing across his face. "Suit yourself. But you know, people get lost out here. It's easy to lose your way when the night swallows you whole." "Thanks for the warning," I said, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. As I swiped my card, I felt a shiver run down my spine, as if I had crossed an invisible threshold into a realm of danger. He watched me with an intensity that made the hair on my arms stand on end. The transaction completed, he handed me my receipt, his fingers brushing mine for a moment that felt like an eternity. "Where'd you come from?" he asked again, his tone shifting to one of familiarity, as if we were old friends instead of strangers in a desolate gas station. "Just from the city," I said, my voice wavering. "Which city?" The question was innocuous, even friendly, but it felt ominous, like a noose tightening around my throat. "Just a big city." "You wouldn't know it," I replied, my patience wearing thin. He chuckled, his laughter echoing hollowly in the confined space. "You'd be surprised how much I know. Been here a long time. Seen a lot of folks come and go." The lights flickered violently once more, plunging the station into darkness for a heartbeat longer than before. I felt my heart race as I struggled to steady my breath. "Look, I really need to get going," I said, taking a step back, desperate for distance from this man who seemed to know too much. Sure, Chuck said, waving a dismissive hand. "Just be careful out there. Not everyone makes it home." His smile faded, replaced by a cold look that sent ice curling around my spine. I turned abruptly, pushing through the automatic doors, eager to return to the safety of my car. The night air hit me like a slap, knocking the breath from my lungs. I hurried to my vehicle, fumbling my keys from my pocket. In the rearview mirror, I caught Chuck's gaze through the glass of the station. He watched me with an unsettling stillness, his smile now replaced by a knowing scowl. I slammed the car door and locked it, the sound echoing in the stillness. I could feel his eyes on me as I turned the ignition, the engine sputtering to life. As I pulled away, I glanced back one last time. He stood in the doorway, illuminated by the light of the station. But the flickering bulbs cast him in shadow, giving him a shape that lingered too long in my mind. As I drove into the vast emptiness, the sense of dread twisted in my stomach. The road stretched endlessly before me, swallowed by the dark, and my thoughts raced toward a terrifying realization. I wasn't just alone on this silent night. Something was watching me, endlessly. Story 2, Ice in the Shadows. Moving to a new town had always been a dream of mine, and when I finally got the keys to my little house on Sycamore Street, I thought I'd stepped into a new chapter of my life. The paint was chipping, the yard overgrown, but it spoke to me in ways that whispered promise and potential. I envisioned weekends filled with sunlight, a garden sprouting to life, and a fresh start that would wash away the remnants of my past. Little did I know, my fresh start would dissolve into a twisted tale of paranoia. The first few days settled into a comfortable routine. I unpacked boxes, organized my belongings, and waved at the occasional neighbor I spotted while landscaping the yard. Yet, there was one neighbor who unnerved me. The man lived in the house directly across the street. He had a peculiar way of standing by his window, staring out, always just out of sight unless I happened to glance up from my tasks. His posture was rigid, and though he didn't appear to move much, his presence was unsettling. After a week, I grew increasingly aware of his gaze. It wasn't just that I could feel someone watching me, it was the sense of being analyzed. I caught glimpses of him through my peripheral vision. When I would look up, my heart would race and my palms would sweat. He would stand there, in the shadow of his drapes, peering through the glass with a penetrating stare, like a hawk sizing up its prey. One evening, while I was tending to the flowers I had planted in the front garden, petunias and daisies, I spotted him again. He was there, arms crossed, leaning against the window frame. The dim light from his living room made his features indistinct, but the weight of his gaze was heavy. I pretended to focus on my gardening, but the hairs on my neck stood on end. I couldn't shake the feeling he was measuring my every move. The next day, I decided to confront my mounting anxiety by taking a longer walk. I wandered through the neighborhood, careful not to let my thoughts drift to the man with the unsettling stare. I passed houses with children playing, lawns mowed crisply, and neighbors chatting amiably. It felt good to be out, away from the confines of my house. But as evening approached, a dread crept back into my bones. Later that night, after putting the finishing touches on my meager dinner, I glanced through the window toward his house. The light in his living room was on, and for the first time, I could see him moving about. It was strange how he flitted between rooms with no apparent purpose, as if he were setting a scene in an unending play. Each flicker of his movement was oddly coordinated, like he was in tune with a rhythm I couldn't hear. Days turned into weeks, and the watching continued. I couldn't help but feel I was starting to unravel. I became hyper-aware of my own routines, almost to the point of obsession. On mornings when I left for work, I would look across the street to see if he was there. When I returned home, I often found myself glancing up, expecting to catch him observing me with that same unnerving intensity. Then came the night I stumbled upon the cameras. I had invited a couple of new friends over for a dinner. They arrived, laughter ringing through my home and momentarily distracting me from the ever-present dread of my neighbor. As the evening wound down, I stepped outside for a breath of fresh air, still half absorbed in the warmth of companionship. That's when I noticed a glint from the corner of my eye, just beyond the tree that separated our yards. I moved closer, heart racing. What I found froze me in my tracks, two small cameras mounted on the tree, angled toward my home. The sight was jarring. The blood in my veins turned to ice as chills crept down my spine. I stumbled back, my thoughts spiraling. Was I really being watched? Fear clawed at my chest as I re-entered my house. I locked the door and turned off the lights, hoping to escape the glare of the cameras, but sleep eluded me. The shadows in my own house felt foreign and oppressive. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, staring at the walls that had once felt so inviting. My mind raced with questions, and every creak of the floorboards sounded like whispers. What did he want? Why was he watching me? What else might he have hidden? The days that followed were a blur of unease. I felt trapped in a web of my own paranoia. I installed blinds, closed the curtains, and avoided looking out the window altogether. Yet, no matter how hard I tried, I could still sense those invisible eyes trained on me, lurking just outside the periphery of my life. My world shrank as I became a prisoner to my own home, a fortress of anxiety. I had to confront him, I decided. It was the only way to reclaim my life. Understanding that fear would not yield without confrontation, I steeled myself. I would march across the street, knock on his door, and demand answers. I would not be a victim of his voyeuristic games. But deep down, I felt the flickers of doubt. Would confronting him only escalate the situation? What if he was more unhinged than I imagined? As I lay awake that night, staring into the darkness, I wondered what horrors were brewing behind the mask of a friendly neighborhood. The thought pulled me closer to the edge of sanity. I needed to know the truth, even if it meant stepping into a darkness I could barely comprehend. The following week crawled by in an unsettling haze. Each passing day felt like I was trudging through dense fog, the air thick with an unshakable foreboding, the walls of my new home closing in around me. Ever since I first peeked through my window and caught a glimpse of my neighbor's silhouette, something had shifted inside me. I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia, a byproduct of moving to a new place, but my instincts held otherwise. The man next door was an enigma, his presence a constant, oppressive weight. I found myself frequently glancing through the curtains, half expecting to meet his gaze. Yet, every time I looked, he seemed engrossed in his own world reading, or perhaps watching television in the flickering glow of his living room. It was as if the universe had conspired to craft the perfect illusion of normalcy, a veneer that thinly veiled something profound and unsettling. I caught him watching me more often than I would have liked to admit. His eyes, dark and penetrating, would linger on me, a predatory gleam flickering in their depths. The first time it happened, I had just returned from work. I had set my keys down on the kitchen counter, the dull clang echoing in the silence, when I felt the weight of his stare. I turned, and there he was, just beyond the glass, visible only for a fleeting moment before he melted back into the shadows of his dimly lit home. After that, I became hyper-aware of his movements. I began to notice the rhythms of his life, the way he seemed to know when I returned from work, how he would be outside, tending to his garden or adjusting the shutters just as I stepped out. Part of me wondered if it was all in my head, but each encounter tightened the knot of anxiety in my chest. I decided to confront the situation. One late afternoon, emboldened by a mixture of curiosity and dread, I took a walk around the block, my heart racing. As I passed his house, I glanced over, trying to catch him off guard. He stood on his porch, the sunlight casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward me, his expression inscrutable. "Nice day, isn't it?" I called out, forcing a casual tone that felt more like a strained attempt at normalcy. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as though weighing my words. "Yes," he replied, his voice low and gravelly, almost like gravel crunching underfoot. "You've been busy lately." A chill danced down my spine at the way he spoke, as if he was privy to every detail of my life. I smiled awkwardly, feeling exposed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was merely toying with me. Despite my best intentions to brush it off, the days following that encounter grew heavier. I couldn't sleep, my dreams plagued by fragmented images of him lurking just beyond my window, or me being watched through 1,000 pairs of eyes. Each morning, I woke to find the sun glaring at me like an accusatory witness to my unraveling sanity. Then came the moment that shattered the fragile grip I had on reality. One Sunday evening, a gust of wind rattled the window panes, and I decided to close the curtains, seeking comfort in the dim, soothing twilight. As I drew them shut, something caught my eye, a faint glint emerged from the corner of the room. I squinted against the dying light, and my heart dropped as I recognized the shape of a small black object nestled in my garden. A lens. My breath caught in my throat as I rushed outside. The air was cold against my skin, and the shadows danced in the twilight. I crouched beside a flower bed and picked up the camera, its surface smooth and cold. Panic flooded my veins as I examined it. It had to belong to him. But why? It wasn't just a stray, abandoned piece of equipment. It was a surveillance camera, its lens pointed directly towards my windows. My hands trembled as I turned it over. There, engraved in the metal, was a serial number. I hurried back inside and grabbed my laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard. I had to know what I was dealing with, what I had stumbled into. A quick search revealed a world of disturbing possibilities. He could have been recording me, surveilling my every move, plotting something that I couldn't fathom. The pit in my stomach deepened with dread, and I felt nauseous. I glanced out the window again, my heart pounding, but I couldn't see him. I cursed under my breath, frantic thoughts racing. Could I confront him? What if I was wrong? What if it was all just a misunderstanding? But as I gripped the camera tightly, the truth slithered into my mind, cold and viscous. I wasn't just imagining things. I was being watched. That night, I locked every door and window, though the thought of sleep felt impossible. I set my phone to record, hoping to capture whatever he was doing. Time crept by, but the house remained eerily quiet, the shadows pooling in the corners like spilled ink. I sat on the edge of my bed, feeling the weight of 1,000 eyes pressing down on me. Then, just as the clock struck 2, I heard it. A soft rustle outside my window, barely discernible, yet it sent electric waves of fear coursing through me. My heart raced, pounding in rhythm with the mounting dread. I held my breath, straining to listen. The rustling grew louder, accompanied by a subtle thump against the wall, then silence. I leaned closer to the window, careful to avoid the light. There he was, standing in the darkness, just beyond the threshold of my vision. His figure shifted as he adjusted something, and I felt the icy grip of terror clench around my throat. I was no longer just a man in a new neighborhood. I was prey, and he was hunting me. The days whirled by in a haze of unease, each dawn igniting the flickering flame of dread that had taken up residence in my gut. I had spent hours on the internet, researching my new neighbor, a man shrouded in an atmosphere of mystery, but I found little beyond the basics: name, age, and a few scattered rumors of odd behavior. Everyone in the neighborhood seemed to know him, yet no one had anything concrete to report. My unease morphed into obsession. I caught snippets of movement through the sheer curtains of his living room window, an unsettling ballet of shadow and light. There he was again, standing rigid and still, as if he were dissecting my every move. My senses heightened. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for something of me, perhaps an answer to a question concealed beneath layers of stillness. One evening, I decided to confront the growing paranoia head-on. I brewed a cup of coffee and sat at my kitchen table, stealing glances at his house, the dim yellow light in his window casting long, eerie shadows over my yard. As I lifted the steaming mug to my lips, I caught sight of him through the reflection in the window, his face illuminated like a cruel mask. I set the coffee down, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. But the flash of his eyes, cold, calculating, sent a tremor down my spine. Anxiety coiled tighter, squeezing out any remnants of rational thought. "He's just a neighbor," I muttered to myself. "You're being ridiculous." The words felt empty, a thin shield against the palpable tension that filled the air. The next morning, I decided it was time to get some clarity. I ventured out to the front yard, pretending to tend to my flower beds, all too aware of the watchful gaze I felt burning into my back. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see him, but his curtains were drawn. Still, the feeling lingered, as if he had stepped outside and was somehow lurking nearby. As the week rolled on, I began to find myself trapped in a vicious cycle of anxiety and curiosity. I would catch him watching me from the window, only to feel the weight of his gaze long after I had retreated indoors. Each time I noticed him, I would rush to the door, ready to confront him, but each time I was thwarted by sheer terror. Something deep within me warned that words exchanged might slice open an unseen wound, exposing a darkness I could not comprehend. Then came the night when I stumbled upon the truth. Insomnia had become my companion, and I spent hours pacing my darkened living room. My thoughts spiraled. What if he was truly dangerous? What if he had been watching not just me, but others, collecting secrets like trophies? I decided to take a late-night walk, hoping the chill of the evening air could dispel the oppressive weight that clung to me. As I strolled down the street, I passed his house, its darkened windows standing like sentinels in the night. Curiosity tugged at me, and I hesitated before approaching, suddenly fixated on the thought that perhaps I could glimpse into his world, see what haunted him. I crept closer, the gravel crunching beneath my feet, and squinted at the window, expecting to see nothing but shadows. Instead, I was greeted by the unsettling sight of a series of screens, flickering images illuminating the dim room. My breath hitched in my throat. I felt like a voyeur in a sickening theater where too many eyes were fixed on me. I peered closer, and my stomach dropped. The screens displayed various angles of my own home, the kitchen, the living room, even the bedroom. My heart raced as realization washed over me, each beat a frantic drum announcing the horror I had unearthed. He had been watching me, not simply glancing from a distance but recording my every move, dissecting my life like a specimen under a microscope. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet as I rushed to put distance between myself and the house. My mind raced with thoughts of what he could do with this footage. Had he been waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Was I merely prey, caught in his twisted game? I stumbled as I turned to flee, scarcely able to breathe, each step pounding against the ground, fueled by an overwhelming desire to escape. I headed home, my heart racing as adrenaline coursed through my veins. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, leaning against it as if the barrier could protect me from whatever shadow loomed outside. Back in the sanctuary of my home, I struggled to process the revelation. I had always considered myself rational, equipped to handle life's uncertainties, yet the darkness of my neighbor's actions forced me to confront my own vulnerability. He wasn't just watching, he was orchestrating a show where I was the unwitting star. What was his end game? The questions swirled around me like a storm, each one more terrifying than the last. I needed to take action, but fear paralyzed me. I couldn't go to the authorities, not yet. I needed to gather evidence, to confirm the truth of what I had seen before exposing myself to whatever his twisted intentions might be. As I formulated a plan, I caught sight of his house through the curtains. It stood silent, but I could feel his presence, lurking, waiting. I pondered for a moment, then reached for my phone, heart racing as I began to write down everything I had witnessed. I would not let him own my fear. Not anymore. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting elongated shadows that danced across my living room floor. It had been a week since I moved into my new home, a modest house in a quiet suburb that I had chosen for its tranquility. At first, it had seemed perfect, an escape from the frenetic pace of my life in the city. But the closeness of the neighborhood soon morphed from comforting to stifling, especially with my neighbor's unsettling presence looming just across the street. All week, I had felt the weight of his gaze, a constant, prickling sensation that crawled along my skin whenever I crossed in front of my windows. I hadn't seen much of him, save for the occasional glimpse through the fabric of the curtains, a shadowy figure, usually dressed in dark clothing, standing still, unmoving, as if he were waiting for something. Or someone. On this particular evening, I decided to confront the discomfort head-on. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, hoping the burn would numb the anxiety that had been steadily building inside me. I flicked on some music, a desperate attempt to drown out my thoughts, but it did little to soothe the unease gnawing at me. A sudden movement outside caught my eye. I turned to the window and saw him, my neighbor, standing in his yard, uncomfortably close to the property line that separated us. He was staring directly at my house, his face obscured by the growing shadows. I felt my heart quicken, each beat echoing in my ears. I forced myself to look away, to shrug off the sensation of being hunted. The next day, I resolved to speak to him. I had to know who he was, what he wanted. After a long day at work, I found myself pacing the floor, rehearsing the conversation in my head. Would he be friendly? Would he invite me over for a beer? Or would he simply dismiss my attempt at camaraderie with cold indifference? The anxiety weighed heavily on me, but my curiosity pushed me forward. As I stepped outside, the air was heavy with an unnatural stillness. The sun dipped lower, casting golden hues that faded into twilight. I took a deep breath and crossed the street, my footsteps sounding too loud against the silence. When I reached his yard, I hesitated, suddenly unsure of myself. "Hi there," I called, attempting to sound casual. "I'm your new neighbor, Ethan." He turned slowly, the faintest hint of a smile brushing his lips. "Hello," he replied, his voice deep and gravelly, like the rustling of dead leaves. He stood just a bit too still, a little too rigid. There was something unnerving in the way his dark eyes glinted, as if he were studying me intently, dissecting my every move. "I just thought I'd introduce myself," I continued, forcing a smile that felt brittle. "I've seen you around and thought I'd come over." "I've seen you too," he said, his gaze unwavering. A chill slid down my spine, and I felt exposed, as if he could see through my skin to the thoughts swirling within. We exchanged some pleasantries, but it felt forced, like we were actors in a play neither of us wanted to perform. As I started to walk away, a thought nagged at the edge of my mind, an odd sensation pressing against my consciousness. Why hadn't I seen him during the day? Why did he always seem to be lurking in the shadows? That night, I lay in bed, the shadows of my room swallowing the light. My mind raced with thoughts of my neighbor, piecing together the fragments of our interactions. I wondered what lurked behind those dark curtains, what he was hiding. I finally drifted off to sleep, but the features of his face haunted my dreams, twisting into grotesque visages. The next day, I returned home to find my heart pounding like a drum. I wanted to explore the boundaries of my paranoia, to understand the roots of my fear. I had an idea. I grabbed my phone and headed outside, casually walking around the perimeter of my house. From there, I could see into his yard, and I climbed onto the fence, peering over cautiously. The moment my eyes adjusted to the dim light, my stomach dropped. There, nestled among the bushes, I spotted the glint of metal, several small cameras positioned strategically around his property, all seemingly pointed toward my home. Panic surged through me, hot and electric. I stepped back, my heart racing as the reality of what I had discovered crashed over me like a wave. I turned and bolted back inside, slamming the door behind me. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps as I leaned against the cold wood, my mind racing with questions and fears. What was his motive? Why had he been watching? Was there anything else he had hidden? The sense of safety I had felt just days before evaporated like morning mist, leaving behind an oppressive dread that threatened to swallow me whole. I stumbled to my phone, hands trembling as I dialed the local police. As the ringing filled the silence, I realized that I couldn't stay in that house any longer. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air thick with suffocating tension. I needed to escape, to find somewhere safe and reassess my next move. When the officer arrived, I explained everything, my words tumbling out in a frantic rush. I could see the skepticism in his eyes, but he took notes diligently, promising to investigate. As he left, a sense of unease settled in my stomach. What if the cameras weren't all he had hidden? What if my neighbor was more dangerous than I realized? That night, as I lay in bed, the darkness felt heavier than ever. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the silence, waiting for something, anything, to break it. The shadows loomed larger now, alive with the threat of the unknown. And as sleep eluded me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just being watched. I was being hunted. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the street, I found myself standing at the kitchen sink, washing the remnants of my dinner. I had spent the better part of the evening trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that clung to me like a damp fog. It had been a week since I first noticed my neighbor's eyes, dark and watchful, pouring into me from across the empty space that separated our homes. Every glance I stole towards his window, his curtains perpetually drawn back, revealed the same sight: a figure sitting in the dim light, a shape eccentric enough to catch attention but too indistinct to draw conclusions. It was as if he existed solely to observe me, and the notion burrowed deep into my mind, festering with paranoia. That night, as I dried my hands with a dish towel, I caught a movement in my peripheral vision. Startled, I turned just in time to see him, my neighbor, standing by his window, his gaze fixed on me. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, and quickly glanced back down at the sink, feigning indifference. My heart raced, the rhythm echoing in my ears like a sinister drum. When I finally mustered the courage to look again, he was gone. Just like that, vanished behind the curtain that had become the threshold of my unease. I wanted to dismiss it all as coincidence, but after a week of these strange encounters, each one more laden with tension than the last, it became harder to rationalize. In the days that followed, I found myself obsessively checking the window every few minutes, as if expecting to find him standing there, waiting for me to engage. Each time I did, I felt his gaze pierce through the glass, an invisible thread binding us in an unsettling dance. The more I tried to ignore it, the more alive my paranoia grew, weaving its way into my dreams. One evening, I decided to confront my fears head-on. I gripped my keys tightly as I walked out my front door, all too aware of the sound my footsteps made against the pavement. With each step, I felt my heart beating faster, the thud resonating in my chest like a war drum. I approached the boundary of our properties, a simple white picket fence separating me from the unknown. I took a deep breath, my resolve faltering for a moment. My neighbor's house loomed larger as I drew nearer. The porch light flickered ominously, the shadows stretching and twisting like dark tendrils reaching for me. I raised my fist to knock but hesitated, the door standing ominously before me. Instead, I turned and glanced back at my own home, the comforting glow of my living room offering a semblance of safety. And then I saw it, a flash of movement from the corner of my eye. My gaze snapped back to the house next door. A glint of metal caught the light, reflecting sharp and bright before disappearing behind the curtain. My heart sank. I couldn't shake the thought that something was terribly wrong. The very idea of my neighbor possessing a camera made my skin crawl, but I couldn't simply ignore the possibility. The dread grew heavier, weighing down my limbs as I retreated back into my house, locking the door behind me. That night, I could hardly sleep, tossing and turning beneath the sheets. My dreams were tainted with visions of cameras peering through the darkness, lenses glinting like I was watching my every move. I woke in the early hours, drenched in sweat, the night's terrors dancing behind my closed eyelids. In the mornings, I made a routine of standing by my window, feigning casualness as I observed him. I noted every little detail, how he moved, his actions, his odd hobbies that seemed to involve too much time spent meticulously arranging his collection of strange trinkets in the dim light of his living room. Each time he caught me watching, a shiver raced down my spine as I felt the intensity of his gaze. Then, on the seventh night, I decided enough was enough. I needed proof. Armed with a flashlight and my phone, I ventured outside, determination coursing through my veins. I crept across the yard, heart hammering loudly as I approached the side of his house. The dim glow of his porch light fell on the ground, and I crouched low, testing the ground beneath my feet. I found a small window, slightly ajar, hidden behind a tangle of thick foliage. My fingers trembled as I pushed it open, the rust of the hinges creaking softly in protest. I slipped inside, the air stale and thick with dust. It was dark, the faintest slivers of moonlight filtering through the cracks and illuminating a collection of shadowy shapes looming around me. As I fumbled for my flashlight, a sharp gasp escaped my lips when I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. There, attached to the wall in a haphazard manner, were several small cameras, each one pointed towards my house. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as I realized what I had stumbled upon. My neighbor was more than a mere observer. He was a collector of my life, a voyeur documenting every aspect of my existence. Just then, a sound echoed from behind me, a soft rustle that sent panic surging through my veins. I turned slowly, dread curling in the pit of my stomach, and came face to face with him. My neighbor stood there, his eyes wide with surprise but carved with a sinister smile. "I wondered when you'd come," he said, his voice smooth yet laced with something darker. My instinct kicked in, propelling me toward the window, but he stepped forward, blocking my path. The reality of my situation settled like lead in my chest. "You shouldn't have looked," he whispered, as the darkness swallowed us both whole. Story 3: Vanished Shadows. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the towering pines as I set up camp at the edge of the clearing. I had always sought solace in nature, leaving behind the chaos of city life for the serenity of the woods. With my tent pitched and a fire crackling merrily, I felt a flicker of excitement replace the fatigue that had weighed on me all day. This was my escape, my retreat from the noise and demands of the world. As night enveloped the forest, I prepared a simple meal. Each crackle of the fire was a reminder of my isolation, but tonight it felt comforting. The stars began to pinch through the blanket of darkness, twinkling like distant promises. I leaned back against a tree, the bark rough against my skin, and gazed up at the sky. The tranquility was a balm to my frayed nerves, but I couldn't shake a nagging feeling that something was watching. I shrugged it off as paranoia, the remnants of too many horror movies. After all, I was alone in the woods, miles away from civilization. The only sounds were the rustling leaves and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot, sounds I had once found soothing. It was only when I retreated to my tent that the uneasy feeling curled around my chest like a vine. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was dreamless and deep. I awoke to the sound of branches snapping, a definitive crack that pulled me from sleep. My heart raced as I strained to listen. The fire had died down to embers, but the moonlight illuminated the campsite enough for me to see. There was no one. Just the whispering wind playing tricks on me. I shook my head, scolding myself for being jumpy. It was just the woods alive, breathing, and unyielding. I sat up and glanced around, noticing at that moment how the air felt different, heavier somehow. It was then that I noticed something out of place. My backpack, which I had left against a tree, now sat several feet away, its zipper open and the contents partially scattered on the ground. Confusion settled in as I inspected the mess. Had someone been here? My mind raced with possibilities. I had locked my camping gear, and yet the reality was undeniable. Someone had moved my things. It could have been an animal, I reasoned, but deep down, I felt the cold grip of fear take hold. I gathered my belongings, stuffing them back into the bag. As I returned to my tent, I reminded myself that I was merely overreacting. I crawled back inside, zipping the flap tightly, and tried to quiet my racing thoughts. Sleep eluded me for the rest of the night, shadows dancing just beyond the fabric of my tent. The next morning, I woke to the sun's rays filtering through the trees, warming my face. The remnants of the previous night's fear felt distant, almost laughable. I made coffee, the rich aroma grounding me in the present, banishing the shadows of paranoia that clung to me. But as I sipped my coffee, I noticed that my tent's position felt off. Inspecting the area, I found more items out of place. My flashlight lay several feet away from where I had left it, and the knife I had secured near my sleeping bag was now missing. A chill washed over me, a shiver that sank deep into my bones. I forced myself to breathe, rationalizing it as nothing more than my own disorganization or maybe a particularly clever raccoon. Determined to shake off the unease, I spent the day hiking, trying to immerse myself in the beauty of the wilderness. The forest was stunning, the underbrush vibrant with life. Yet every rustle and snap kept my senses on edge, the weight of my solitude pressing down on me. I returned to camp that evening, hoping for a peaceful night and a fresh start. But as darkness fell, I felt that familiar prickle on the back of my neck. This time, I didn't sleep. I lay wide awake, the night stretching endlessly, my mind racing with every sound. Just as I began to succumb to drowsiness, a crashing noise erupted from the underbrush, cutting through the stillness like a knife. My heart raced again, a relentless drum echoing in my ears. I unzipped the tent flap slightly, peering into the blackness. It was impossible to see anything beyond the pale moonlight dancing through the trees. I strained my ears, listening for any sign of movement. Silence. The heavy weight of dread settled back in. When morning finally broke, I emerged from my tent, hesitant but resolute to face whatever had disturbed my peace. My heart sank as I surveyed the camp. My gear had been moved again, an eerie pattern emerging. The campsite felt wrong, tainted. Each time I had left, something shifted. It was as if someone had been toying with me, rearranging my life before my very eyes. I spent the day on edge, but I refused to let fear consume me. I considered packing up and leaving, but I didn't want to give in to irrationality. The woods had always been my refuge. I was not about to let some phantom scare me away. As dusk fell, the shadows grew long and twisted, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer alone. The forest whispered secrets, and I felt a presence, a specter lurking just beyond my view. I stifled a gasp when I caught a glimpse of movement in the trees, just out of focus. I was not alone. The realization gripped me, sending icy tendrils of fear crawling up my spine. I was being watched, hunted, and whatever was out there wanted me to know it. The second night crept in, shrouded by a dense fog that clung to the trees like a terrified child to its mother. I could hear the low rustle of leaves, a sound I had come to recognize as the forest's heartbeat. My fire crackled, but anxiety crackled louder in my mind. After the unsettling discovery of my gear misplaced, I decided to keep a close watch. I resolved to stay awake, the firelight flickering against the encroaching darkness. I had set up my tent at the edge of a clearing, surrounded by towering pines. The path I had taken to the campsite was overgrown and barely visible, which only added to the feeling of isolation. I could sometimes hear the distant call of a night owl, but for now, the woods were eerily silent. Each rustle made my heart race, each snap of a twig felt like a warning shot. Sitting by the fire, I examined the items I'd laid out: my backpack, the small portable stove, a flashlight, and the few provisions I had managed to pack. The items were in their intended places, but I couldn't shake the unease that followed me like a shadow. As the fire dwindled, I began to realize the absurdity of my predicament. I was just a guy camping alone. There was no one else here. Yet the thought of someone lurking in the darkness made my skin crawl. I glanced at my watch. A meager hour had passed since I had settled in for the night. I shifted my weight uncomfortably. The shadows flickered and danced, twisting the shapes of the trees into grotesque figures. I realized I was imagining things, allowing paranoia to seep into my mind. I had read about solo camping and its mental toll. Yet, my instinct screamed that I was a target. Maybe it was just my overactive imagination. I took a deep breath, attempting to calm myself. I decided to distract my mind with the comforting noise of nature. I reached into my pocket for my phone, intending to check the time again, but felt only the emptiness of my jeans. I cursed under my breath. I must have left it in my tent. Frowning, I stood and walked over, the wooden floor of the tent creaking ominously as I unzipped the flap. Inside, the flickering light of my headlamp illuminated my gear. The phone lay on the sleeping bag, just as I had left it. As I reached for it, a chill crept through me. The sleeping bag was eerily warm, almost as if someone else had been here. I shook my head, chiding myself for being foolish. I switched on the phone. It was only 10:30. I debated whether to stay awake or succumb to the exhaustion that had been gnawing at me. I chose sleep, reasoning that I needed rest to face the wilderness in the morning. I secured the tent flap and tucked myself into my sleeping bag. The darkness pressed around me, but the rhythmic sound of my breathing lulled me into a fitful sleep. The next morning, I woke with a start, sunlight streaming through the tent and birds chirping insistently. I had expected to find my gear intact, but when I unzipped the flap and stepped outside, a wave of dread washed over me. The mess I had left around the fire pit was gone. The backpack was further from the fire, nearer to the trees, and my stove was oddly turned sideways. My heart raced as I scanned the area. I was sure I had left everything in one place. I knelt down, my hands trembling slightly as I inspected the site. Did I really move it? No, I was certain I hadn't. Panic roiled in my stomach. I fought to suppress the rising tide of fear. Maybe I had just been careless in the dark, but a gnawing voice whispered that something was wrong. I took a deep breath, trying to ground myself. I decided to take a walk along the riverbank to clear my head. The air was crisp, and each breath filled my lungs with the earthy scent of pine and damp soil. I walked for what felt like hours, listening to the sound of the water lapping against the stones, but the unease still clung to me like a second skin. The sun was beginning its descent when I returned to camp, and as I approached, I noticed something was off again. My backpack was not just rearranged, it was opened. The zipper gaped wide, exposing the contents within. Panic surged again. I rushed forward, my heart hammering in my chest as I pulled back the flap. Everything was in disarray. My snacks were strewn across the ground, and my water bottle was missing. Every rational thought clouded over. I looked around, convinced I would catch a glimpse of someone lurking just out of sight. Instead, the woods remained silent. I forced myself to breathe slowly, but my chest felt tight. Someone had been here, and now they knew I was alone. Was it another camper? Or something far worse? My instinct screamed that I was being hunted. I packed in a frenzy, fear giving me a sense of urgency. I needed to leave. I hurriedly shoved my belongings into the backpack, ignoring the stabbing pain in my wrists as I secured the straps. I didn't waste time cooking. I simply drank from my remaining water bottle and grabbed my flashlight. I had to get out of the forest before night fell completely. As I turned to leave, a harsh snap echoed from behind me. I froze, eyes darting to the trees. My heart pounded in my ears. The sound was unmistakable. Something was moving just beyond my line of sight. I felt it, a presence in the shadows, watching me. With panic igniting my legs, I bolted down the path, adrenaline pushing me forward. Each step felt like a heartbeat, echoing my fear. The further I ran, the more the trees seemed to close in around me, the branches clawing at my arms and legs as if trying to pull me back into their embrace. I had to keep moving, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was behind me, closing in. I could hear the faint rustle of footsteps, a rhythm that matched my own. Desperation clawed at my throat as I fought against the growing sense of dread. I stumbled into the clearing, the sunlight fading behind the horizon. I could see the direction I needed to go, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I was not alone. And this time, it felt like the forest was alive, and it wanted me to stay. As dusk settled over the forest, a heavy blanket of dread wrapped around me. I glanced nervously at the trees, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. The solitude I had once craved now felt like a suffocating shroud. Each snap of a twig, each rustle of leaves, sent shivers down my spine. I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched. Last night, I had returned to my campsite to find my backpack unzipped and its contents strewn about like the aftermath of a storm. At first, I had brushed it off as clumsiness on my part, but the nagging thought that someone had been there gnawed at me. I had double-checked every zipper and secured my gear, telling myself it was merely wildlife curious about my supplies. Tonight, however, the air was thicker with tension. I had made a small fire, its flickering light battling the encroaching darkness. The flames danced in an erratic rhythm, casting twisted shadows that felt almost alive. I stared into the fire, memories of my childhood camping trips filling my mind. Those days were filled with laughter, warmth, and the comforting presence of family. But I was alone now, and that loneliness felt like a predator stalking me from the shadows. I poured myself a cup of instant coffee, the steamy aroma briefly soothing my frayed nerves. I sat on my camp chair, trying to savor the moment, but the sense of unease was palpable. I could not shake the feeling that whatever had rummaged through my belongings was still lurking nearby. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the last rays of light faded into an inky blackness. I turned my gaze to the trees, peering into the darkness, half expecting to see a pair of eyes watching me from behind a trunk. I felt vulnerable, exposed in my little clearing, surrounded by the impenetrable wilderness. I forced myself to focus on the fire, the snap and crackle of burning wood barely masking the disquiet in my mind. I took a sip of the coffee, but the warmth of the cup couldn't thaw the chill creeping up my spine. Suddenly, a sound pierced the stillness, a low groan, almost human. I froze, my heartbeat quickening. It came again, a guttural noise that echoed through the trees. My pulse raced as I fought the urge to jump up and run. Instead, I strained my ears, trying to discern the source. The groaning shifted into a series of soft whispers, unintelligible yet laced with urgency. I grabbed my flashlight, its beam cutting through the dark like a knife. With tentative steps, I moved towards the sound, my heart hammering in my chest. Each crunch of twigs underfoot sounded like thunder in the silence. I called out, my voice trembling, "Hello? Is anyone there?" The whispers stopped abruptly. Silence swallowed the forest. I stood frozen, the beam of my flashlight trembling in my grip. Then, as if mocking my fear, the whispers returned, rising and falling like a ghostly lullaby. I wanted to turn back, to retreat to the safety of my fire, but my curiosity pushed me forward. I inched toward the noise, my instinct screaming at me to run. As I rounded a tree, the flashlight beam caught something on the ground, a piece of fabric, torn and frayed. I bent down, heart racing, and realized it was part of a jacket. The color was faded, but I recognized it. It had once belonged to a friend who had gone missing years ago during a camping trip in these very woods. Suddenly, the realization crashed over me like icy water. I wasn't alone here. My gut twisted as the memories flooded back, stories of campers vanishing, their bodies never discovered, their screams echoing through the dark. A cold sweat broke out on my skin. I turned abruptly, ready to flee, but something urged me to look back. In the distance, just beyond the reach of my flashlight, shadows flitted between the trees, barely perceptible yet undeniably present. My breath hitched in my throat. I stumbled back, unable to break my gaze from the shadows. They shifted, weaving in and out of the trees, moving closer. Panic ignited within me, and I sprinted back towards my camp, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I could hear them now, soft footsteps, almost rhythmic, following me through the underbrush. I could feel eyes boring into my back, a presence pursuing me like a hunter tracking its prey. I burst into the clearing, my heart pounding in my ears. I grabbed my backpack, shoving my belongings inside with frantic urgency. I couldn't stay here. I needed to leave, to get out of this forest before whatever was out there caught up to me. The fire flickered, smoke curling upwards, but I had no time to gather my supplies. I tore apart the camp, throwing things into my bag without care. My hands trembled as I zipped it shut. Just as I turned to make my escape, I felt the air shift. A figure emerged from the tree line, silhouetted against the dying embers of my fire. It stood still, watching. My breath caught, and my mind raced to comprehend the scene before me. The figure was draped in a tattered coat, the same color as the fabric I had found. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice breaking. The figure tilted its head, and in that moment, I could feel the weight of my terror pressing down on me. It spoke, but the words were lost in the crackle of the fire, indistinct and haunting. I took a shaky step back, the reality of the situation crashing down on me. Whoever or whatever was out there was not just a figment of my imagination. I was being hunted. As the figure took a step closer, I turned and ran, the underbrush clawing at my legs as I sprinted into the dark. The hunt had begun, and I had no idea where it would lead me. All I knew was that I couldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting elongated shadows across the bare ground. I had barely slept the previous night, tossing and turning on my air mattress, tangled in a web of anxiety. Each creak of the branches overhead kept me on high alert, and by dawn, I felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me. I brewed a cup of coffee, trying to shake off the sensation that my every move was being watched. The first signs of something amiss had come 2 days earlier. It began innocently enough, a small thud in the night that startled me awake. I dismissed it as a raccoon rummaging through my supplies, but the following morning brought more troubling evidence. My backpack, tightly secured the night before, sat a few feet away from its usual spot, unzipped as if someone had rummaged through it. I had brushed it off as an oversight, chalking it up to a restless sleep. But the second night, when I returned from a hike, I found my flashlight set at an angle, aimed directly at my tent. Anger bubbled up inside me. Who would dare to invade my space? My rational mind fought against the rising tide of paranoia, but with every passing hour, it became harder to ignore. As daylight faded, a cold breeze whispered through the trees, sending a shiver down my spine. I decided to investigate. The forest swelled with shadows, and I took slow, deliberate steps away from my camp. I kept the beam of my flashlight low, scanning the underbrush for any signs of movement. I felt foolish for being afraid. After all, I was alone in the vast wilderness, where every rustle seemed amplified. But something in the air was different, charged with an unshakable tension. As I trudged deeper into the shadows, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. I circled back to my tent, still unnerved. The sun had vanished behind the horizon, cloaking the trees in darkness. I hesitated outside my tent, then forced myself inside. I shoved a rock against the flap to keep it from opening, needing some semblance of security. Heavy silence enveloped me, and my pulse quickened as I wondered if the intruder might return. I fished out my notebook and scribbled down the events of the day. Writing had always grounded me, but even now, the words felt hollow, like they belonged to someone else. The shadows outside shifted, and I paused to listen, straining to hear beyond the walls of fabric. The forest creaked inside, the sounds wrapping around me like a shroud. Just before sleep began to pull at my eyelids, I noticed it again, a vague whispering sound, just out of reach of my comprehension. I tried to ignore it, but it gnawed at the edges of my sanity. My thoughts spiraled, imagining a figure lurking just beyond the thin fabric. I eventually succumbed to my exhaustion, promising myself I would leave first thing in the morning. The next day, I woke to find my tent flap slightly ajar, the rock I had used as a makeshift lock strangely absent. I shot up, heart hammering against my ribcage as I scanned the clearing. My backpack was untouched, but the unease settled deeper within me. I knew then that I wouldn't be able to stay another night. I had to escape this place. With determination, I packed my things, but an unsettling sensation gripped my insides. It felt as if the very trees were watching, their twisted branches stretching like gnarled fingers. I took the trail back to my car, each step heavier than the last. As I walked, I replayed each night in my mind, searching for something I might have missed. The feeling of ice tracking me, the whispers that seemed to follow as I moved. Midway through the hike, I stopped in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. There, among the undergrowth, lay my rock, the one I had used to secure my tent. How could it have ended up so far from my camp? I retrieved it, flipping it over in my hands. Mud and leaves clung to its surface, but there were also fresh scratches, deep lines that hadn't been there before. A chill shot through me. It was a subtle reminder that my presence was known. I pressed on, pushing through the fear. Just a little further. But as I turned a corner on the trail, my heart plummeted. There, in the middle of the path, stood a figure. A silhouette against the fading light, indistinct but unmistakably human. I froze, instinct screaming at me to turn back. The figure remained still, watching. Slowly, I reached for my flashlight, a corner of my mind screaming for me to run. But I couldn't break my gaze. As my fingers curled around the flashlight, the figure shifted slightly, an imperceptible movement, yet it felt like a promise of violence. I flicked the beam on, illuminating the space between us. The light caught the figure's face, momentarily revealing a featureless mask, white, smooth, and perfect. The expression, if it could be called that, was eerily tranquil, and my breath hitched in my throat. I stumbled back, heart racing as I realized I wasn't merely being watched, I was being hunted. I turned on my heel and ran, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Each pounding footfall echoed in the silence, but the whispering sound returned, layered over the frantic rhythm of my heart. I could feel the presence behind me, following, waiting for me to falter. My legs burned as I pushed harder, blurring the line between survival and madness. I burst through the trees and into the clearing where my tent stood, the flickering light of my campfire barely breaking the surrounding darkness. I had never felt so desperate, so alive and terrified. I needed to leave, but as I grabbed my keys, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. There, among my belongings, lay my backpack, the zipper meticulously aligned, perfectly closed. My heart sank as I realized the truth: the intruder had returned, and I was not merely a visitor in this forest. This was no camping trip, it had become a twisted dance, and I was its unwilling participant. I had hoped the quiet of the woods would be my solace, a retreat from the cacophony of my everyday life. With each passing day, however, that hope soured into dread. The incidents with my belongings were no longer mere annoyances, they had escalated into a full-blown nightmare. The first night I discovered my gear rearranged, I had chalked it up to my own forgetfulness. I had returned to my campsite after exploring the nearby stream only to find my backpack unzipped, the contents spilling like secrets on the ground. I brushed it off. After all, who would come wandering this deep into the woods? But when I returned to the site the next evening, the rearrangement was more apparent. My flashlight was positioned upright, beam facing the tent, as if it were a spotlight ushering in unseen performers. My food stash was neatly lined up in a way that made my stomach churn. With each passing night, my paranoia deepened. It wrapped around me like the chill that clung to the air after the sun dipped below the trees. I began to look over my shoulder. I set up traps, a tripwire with a tin can, clanking in warning, but they were useless against an invisible foe. I felt eyes on me, though every time I turned, the woods remained eerily still. Day 5 brought with it an unusual heat that weighed down my limbs like lead. I ventured out early, hoping that the daylight might provide some clarity, but clarity was elusive. The forest was alive with the sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves, yet I felt nothing but an oppressive silence, an absence of safety that gnawed at my spirit. That afternoon, I found a series of footprints just outside my campsite, the prints small and delicate, almost childlike. The sight stopped my heart. I knelt down, studying the marks in the dirt. They were too small to be an adult's, but large enough to belong to someone. Or something. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting a pair of eyes to bore through the undergrowth. The air felt heavy, thick with tension. I decided to follow the tracks, my heart racing as I took cautious steps deeper into the trees. The prints led me to a clearing, an oasis of sunlight that felt foreign amid my paranoia. I stopped, drawing in a shaky breath, attempting to steady my racing pulse. I scanned the area, half expecting to find someone, perhaps a child, playing in the sunlight. Instead, I found only silence and the gentle sway of the branches above me. Then I saw it. A single piece of fabric snagged on a low-hanging branch. It was shredded at the edges, a deep crimson color that started to dry and darken in the sunlight. My stomach twisted as I approached, and as I bent down to examine the fabric more closely, a noise echoed through the trees, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper, like the wind carrying a secret. I jerked up, panic surging through me. I was not alone. There was something here with me, something that had been watching, lurking just out of sight. I turned on my heel and sprinted back to my campsite, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The forest, once a sanctuary, felt like a trap. The sun descended faster than I anticipated, and the shadows grew long and sinister. I hastily gathered my belongings, putting things away as quickly as I could, the hyper-awareness keeping me on edge. I wanted to leave, to flee this cursed place, but the thought of being out in the dark alone sent a chill down my spine. I had to stay the night, but I would be ready. I could hear the rustling of leaves, feel the weight of unseen eyes as I set up my sleeping bag. The night was unbearable. I lay on my mat, every sound amplified in the stillness, the creaking of trees, the hoot of an owl, the snaps of twigs underfoot. I clutched the knife tightly in my hand, a comfort I had taken for granted just days prior. It felt different now, a flimsy piece of metal against whatever was hunting me. A sound broke through the tension just after midnight, closer this time. It was deliberate, a slow, calculated stride that sent ice crawling up my spine. I could hear it moving through the underbrush, circling my camp. I held my breath, straining to listen, the thudding of my heart drowning out the forest's symphony. Then came the whisper again, clearer this time. It sent shivers down my spine and coated my tongue with fear. I couldn't make out the words, but I felt the meaning seep into my bones. I was the prey. Desperation took hold. I unzipped the tent, terrified yet compelled to confront whatever was out there. The night air was frigid, a stark contrast to the terror radiating through me. I peered out, scanning the tree line, my grip tightening around the knife. Shadows danced like phantoms in the corners of my vision. A shape moved, slithering between the trees. My breath hitched as I caught sight of it, small and lithe, darting from one shadow to another. I called out, the sound trembling on my lips. "Who's there?" A silence fell, pregnant with tension. My voice shattered the stillness, and for a moment I thought I heard laughter, a feathery sound that curled around me, teasing and mocking. Then it was gone. I stood frozen, the weight of fear constricting my throat. It wasn't just that I was being watched. It was the chilling realization that I was being hunted, and the hunter was closing in. I stumbled back into my tent, heart pounding, and clutched the knife tighter, waiting for the dawn, praying for light to chase away the darkness that was now my only companion. Story 4, Watcher in the Shadows. I had never minded the loneliness of the night shift. The warehouse loomed large and empty, its high ceilings echoing with the sounds of my footsteps as I made my rounds. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting shadows that danced across the cold concrete floors. I had worked there for a year, and though my coworkers sometimes joked about the spookiness of the place, I felt at home among the towering shelves stacked with boxes and the scent of aged cardboard. But that night was different. I settled into the small office, the only spot with a chair that didn't creak ominously with even the slightest shift in weight. My phone buzzed against the desk, a sharp reminder of the world outside. I reached for it, expecting another pointless notification from some app one had long forgotten I downloaded. Instead, the screen displayed a text from an unknown number. "Stop moving. You're making it hard to see you." My heart raced as I read the message again. It had to be a prank. Maybe someone on the day shift had gotten bored and decided to mess with me. I laughed it off, but the uneasy feeling lodged itself in my stomach. Returning my phone to the desk, I turned my attention to the task at hand, inventory. Half an hour passed in silence, the hum of the overhead lights my only company. The warehouse was a labyrinth, all stretching in every direction like a city of shadows. With my clipboard in hand, I made my way into the maze of shelves, carefully counting boxes, forcing myself to forget the message that lingered in my mind. Another buzz from my phone startled me. I fished it out again, my heart pounding. The screen lit up with a new message. 3 steps to your left. Just look. I froze. My eyes darted around the vast room, the shadows deepening around me. Who was doing this? Why? I took a deep breath, fighting against the rising tide of fear, and stepped left, my footfalls muted by the thick rubber soles of my boots. Peering around the corner of a shelf, I saw nothing but the rows of boxes looming like tombstones. "Is this a joke?" I texted back, my fingers trembling. "Who are you?" The response came almost instantly. "You shouldn't have done that. Now I know where you are." My mind raced. I considered calling security, but the remote location of the warehouse meant they wouldn't arrive for at least 20 minutes. I was completely alone, trapped in the silence of the building. Then I remembered the back door, the only entrance I could lock. I had seen it when I arrived, its rusted hinges screaming for attention, but had never felt the need to secure it. The thought that someone could be inside, watching me, sent chills down my spine. I tried to focus on my inventory sheet, but the words blurred before my eyes. I felt like a deer caught in headlights, the night pressing around me, thick and suffocating. With my heart racing, I glanced around the aisle. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, and I swore I saw a figure dart from one shelf to another before I could turn my head. I blinked, convincing myself it was just a trick of the light. "Do you feel safe?" the next text read, chilling me to the bone. I couldn't reply. I didn't want to acknowledge it. Instead, I abandoned the clipboard and headed towards the office, my pulse pounding in my ears. I was almost there when I heard it, the soft creak of a floorboard behind me. I spun around, heart racing, but found only the expanse of the empty aisle staring back at me. "Show yourself," I shouted, my voice echoing in the hollow space. I felt ridiculous, yelling at shadows, but the silence was deafening, and I needed to feel some semblance of control. "Don't be afraid," the next message read. "I won't hurt you, yet." Desperation clawed at me. I stepped into the office and slammed the door shut, locking it behind me. The small room was cluttered with paperwork and dust, but it felt like a sanctuary. I fumbled with my phone to call someone, anyone, but the screen went dark. The battery was dead. I cursed under my breath and pulled the charger from the wall, praying it would give my lifeline back. The sudden buzz of my phone jolted me, and I nearly dropped it in my haste. The screen lit up again, illuminating the darkness with a ghostly glow. Just a few more minutes, and I'll be where you are. Panic flooded my system. I pressed my back against the wall, breathing in short, frantic gasps. I wanted to scream, to run blindly out of the warehouse, but the thought of what might be waiting outside kept my feet glued to the floor. A loud bang echoed through the room, the sound of something heavy falling in the distance. I jumped, adrenaline surging. It came from the main floor, a reminder that I was not alone. I crouched down, heart racing, and reached for the door, half expecting it to burst open at any moment. I could feel the darkness gathering, closing in like the jaws of a monstrous beast. As I waited, my mind began to race with possibilities. What if the person was already in the room with me? What if they had slipped through the shadows when I wasn't looking? And then came another message. Look behind you. I felt the cold grip of dread tighten around my throat. I hesitated, preparing to confront whatever lay in the darkness. The fluorescent lights flickered ominously above, and in that moment, with the weight of 1,000 nightmares pressing down upon me, I turned slowly, ready to face my worst fear. My heart had barely settled after the initial shock of the messages. That uncanny ability for the sender to know where I was and what I was doing gnawed at my sanity. I had tried to convince myself it was just a prank, some bored colleague from the day's shift looking to amuse himself at my expense. But as I continued my rounds through the cavernous warehouse, the chill in the air seemed to grow thicker, wrapping around me like a suffocating shroud. I had taken my customary route through the aisles, illuminated by the sporadic flicker of fluorescent lights overhead. Pallets stacked high, shadowy corners pulled with darkness, and the scent of aged cardboard hung heavily in the air. Each step echoed through the emptiness, and every distant creak of the building sounded like a whisper promising to reveal secrets better left untouched. The second message arrived as I rounded the corner by the loading dock. You should check behind you. My breath caught in my throat, and instinctively, I turned to look. The space behind me was deserted, but I could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching, lurking in the shadows. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. It was just a joke, I told myself. Just a sick game. But the sense of dread settled deeper, making my skin crawl. As I continued my shift, I fought against the growing urge to flee. Retreating to the safety of my car wouldn't erase the messages. It wouldn't take away the feeling that someone was in here with me. I plucked my phone from my pocket, the screen glowing dimly in the dark, and stared at the number. It was an unknown area code, an untraceable entity tapping into my fear. I sent a message back, a futile attempt to reclaim some control. Who is this? I typed, my fingers trembling slightly. My breath slowed, my heart hammering in my chest, waiting for a reply. But only silence came, deep and oppressive, wrapping around me like the darkness of the warehouse. The minutes crawled by, and I found myself standing at the entrance of the break room. The dim light flickered hesitantly, casting a sickly yellow hue over the stained table and mismatched chairs. I stifled the urge to check my phone again, afraid of what I would see. Instead, I turned to the vending machine in the corner, hoping a sugary snack might stave off the creeping terror. As I rummaged through my pockets for change, I heard a soft noise, barely perceptible but unmistakably there. A shuffle, almost like a whisper of movement. I froze, my heart racing anew. The sound seemed to come from the storage room at the back of the break area. I had seen it earlier, dimly lit, the door creaking lazily on its hinges. With a deep breath, I approached the door, each step sending waves of dread crashing through my veins. The smell of stale air wafted out as I pushed it open. Inside, Darkness swallowed the small space. I strained my eyes, but the shadows remained dense and unyielding. I wanted to turn back, but my curiosity overpowered my fear. I stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing off the world outside. My pulse raced in my ears as I swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed for me to leave, but I pressed on, feeling my way along the wall. There was something here. I could feel it, not just the weight of silence, but a palpable presence, lurking just beyond the edge of the light. Suddenly, my phone buzzed violently in my pocket, breaking the stillness. I fumbled for it, pulling it out with trembling fingers. The screen glowed ominously, illuminating my surroundings a fraction more. The message read, "I see you." My stomach dropped. I held the phone up, illuminating the small room, desperately scanning for any sign of life. I caught a glimpse of movement in the far corner. My breath froze in my throat, and I squinted into the darkness. It was too late to turn back now. Someone was here, and they were close. Every ounce of reason told me to run, to escape this nightmare, but my feet felt glued to the floor. Then, in a moment that felt suspended in time, I saw a shadow shift again. It was slight, barely perceptible, but undeniable. Fear coiled tighter within me, and my instincts kicked in. I turned to bolt for the door, but before I could make it, a voice sliced through the darkness, smooth and chilling. "Where do you think you're going?" I whipped around, eyes wide with terror, but there was no one there. Just the oppressive shadow, now thick as smoke, swirling around me. My heart raced, pounding against my ribs as if trying to break free. I scrambled back towards the door, every instinct screaming for escape. With a desperate lunge, I reached for the handle, but it felt foreign, almost as if it were taunting me. I twisted and pulled, but it wouldn't budge. The voice echoed in my mind, its owner concealed in the darkness. "Stay with me a little longer. I want to watch you." Panic surged through me, my breath quickening as I yanked at the door again. Nothing. I was trapped. My phone buzzed again, vibrating in my palm. I glanced down, praying for a savior, but the screen held only more frostbitten words, "You're not alone." And in that moment, I understood that this was more than just a prank. I was in the grip of something sinister, and the sense of being watched had morphed into a reality that I couldn't escape. The darkness closed in, and I knew that whatever was haunting me had no intention of letting me go. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly overhead, casting an eerie glow across the cavernous expanse of the warehouse. My fingers trembled as I stared at the phone in my hand, the screen still illuminating the last message I had received from the unknown number. "You're walking toward the back wall." I glanced over my shoulder, heart racing. The aisles of towering shelves loomed like sentinels around me, dark shadows pooling in their depths. The air felt thick with a miasma of tension pressing against my chest. I had always found solace in the solitude of the night shift, but now it felt suffocating. I had tried to convince myself that it was a prank, a joke played by some bored coworker. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. Each message, each chilling detail about my movements, painted a clearer picture of my reality. I was not alone. "Turn left," the last text had read. I hadn't complied, not wanting to follow some unseen puppeteer's strings. Yet, that only increased my anxiety. I stood in the narrow aisle, frozen, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Texting my boss had crossed my mind, but what could I say? Someone is watching me. It sounded absurd, even to me. Instead, I pocketed the phone as I took a tentative step forward, forcing myself to act like I belonged here, like I was in control of the situation. As I continued my patrol through the warehouse, I fought to dismiss the sense of dread creeping into the corners of my mind. The rhythmic sound of my shoes echoed against the concrete floor, a reminder of my solitude. I checked the time. Midnight. 5 more hours to go. I stepped deeper into the bowels of the warehouse, past empty pallet racks and dusty crates, trying to find distractions. I busied myself organizing stock and checking inventory. Anything to drown out the anxiety gnawing at my insides. But the messages kept coming. You're near the machinery now. I see you. I felt the color drain from my face, and I spun toward the source of the mechanical whirring in the distance, the old packaging machine, long since out of commission. Its presence was a ghost of the warehouse's past, now a relic collecting dust. The thought of someone lurking nearby chilled me to the bone. Who is this? I typed back, my fingers trembling. My heart raced, the thudding sound filling my ears. I waited, the seconds feeling like an eternity. Just someone who wants to play, came the response, devoid of any emotion. It sent a shiver down my spine, and I looked around once more, the shadows feeling heavier, more alive. I took another step back, bumping into a stack of pallets. The noise reverberated through the stillness, and I froze, listening. There it was again, a soft sound, like the faintest whisper of movement. Don't be scared, the message read. I can see you. In a panic, I sprinted toward the nearest exit. I needed to get out, away from this nightmare unfolding around me. My heart thumped loudly in my chest as I reached the door, but it was locked, always locked during the night shift for safety. I scrambled to find my keys, the jangling metal sounding like a death knell in the oppressive silence. Why don't you come find me? The phone chimed, and I froze, key halfway to the lock. I dropped the keys, my hands shaking. The thought of confronting whoever was watching me paralyzed me, yet the dread of staying trapped with a predator fueled my fight or flight response. I turned away from the door, looking for another exit. Behind you, the voice taunted, and I spun around, breath caught in my throat. Nothing but shadows greeted me, and I felt like a fool. This was a game to them, a sick, twisted game. The warehouse was a maze, and I was lost within it, hunted. My mind raced with plans, but all I could hear was the monotonous beep of my phone, each notification pulling me deeper into despair. Are you scared yet? I made my way to the office in the corner, hoping to find some solace behind those locked doors. I fumbled with the handle, praying it was still secure. The door swung open, and I rushed inside, slamming it shut behind me. The office was small but cluttered, papers strewn across the desk, the glow of the computer screen flickering to life. I locked the door tight, resting my back against it, heart pounding in my chest. I felt like I was suffocating, the walls closing in around me. I scanned the room, looking for something, a weapon, a light, anything to make me feel safe. My phone buzzed again, vibrating violently against the desk. I snatched it up, expecting another taunt, but instead, the message read, "I'm right outside." Panic surged through me, and I rushed to the window, peering out into the darkness. Empty, save for the shadows cast by the dim light of street lamps outside. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, straining to see anything beyond. "Don't you want to come out and play?" the text mocked. My breath quickened as I turned back to the room, looking for a way to barricade myself. My mind raced, trying to piece together the night's events. Was it the same person from before? Was I just imagining things? Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the office door, jolting me upright. "Let me in," a voice shouted, but it didn't sound like the same one from before. It was deeper, gruff, almost familiar. My heart hammered in my chest. I had to know. I crept toward the door, dread clawing at my throat. I couldn't stay here. My hand trembled on the doorknob, ready to turn it, but my voice echoed in my mind. "You're not alone." I hesitated, staring at the door, the chilling realization dawning on me that the worst part of this ordeal might still be ahead. I could feel someone watching, waiting for me to make a choice. The light flickered overhead, and I braced myself. Whatever was happening, I needed to fight back. I just had to find a way to escape this nightmare before it consumed me whole. The hum of the fluorescent lights above me buzzed more insistently as the minutes dragged on. I had taken to pacing the concrete floor of the warehouse, my footsteps echoing unnervingly in the cavernous space. I was lost in thoughts of the messages that had invaded my night. Each one had come like clockwork, a reminder that I wasn't alone. The first had arrived just after midnight. "You're still there, aren't you?" And it had set off a chain reaction of anxiety that never fully subsided. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, pulling me from my spiral of unease. I fished it out and stared at the screen. Another text from that unknown number, the same one I had been blocking out of my mind as I tried to work. I felt the temperature drop around me, as if a cold breath had swept through the warehouse. "You opened the east door. Just past the boxes." I glanced over my shoulder at the heavy steel door, which led to a darkened section filled with crates and equipment I didn't need to touch. I hadn't opened that door since the last inventory check, and I certainly hadn't been near it tonight. I felt a chill inch up my spine as I imagined how someone could be watching me, lurking in the shadows within that darkened room. I had to think logically. I was a rational person. This had to be a prank, some kids getting a rise out of me, or perhaps even a coworker with too much time on their hands. The warehouse was located at the outskirts of town, but it was still under video surveillance. I would check the cameras after the shift. Just to ease my mind, I told myself. But as I moved deeper into the warehouse, the wide aisles seemed to stretch on forever, and the shadows shifted in the corners of my vision. I forced myself to focus on my tasks, ticking off boxes in an inventory ledger. I paused whenever I heard the slightest sound, convinced I could hear breathing or whispering just out of earshot. With every tick of the clock, the anxiety twisted tighter in my gut. Another buzz from my phone shattered my concentration. "You're getting nervous. I can see it." The chilling precision of those words dug into me. I looked out over the expanse of the warehouse. My heart raced, and I felt the urge to bolt for the exit. But what if they were right outside? What if someone was watching me? There had been a few strange noises, just the wind, I told myself, but the thought that someone could be hiding in plain sight was too much to bear. I grabbed the box cutter I always kept by my side, a flimsy comfort against an unseen threat. I moved towards the entrance, the heavy door creaking as I approached. There was a small window in the door that let me peer outside at the dimly lit parking lot, but the darkness beyond felt suffocating, as if the night itself was a predator waiting to pounce. I hesitated before pushing the door open. The cold air hit me like a slap, and I was instantly aware of how exposed I felt out there. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again. "You're getting closer to the truth." The words gnawed in my stomach. I pressed my back against the wall and scanned the area for any movement, but it was too quiet. If someone was out there, they had long since vanished into the darkness. I turned to slip back inside the warehouse, but my phone buzzed once more. "Done playing hide and seek? You can't outrun me." Just those words made my heart thud painfully in my chest. A dread I couldn't shake settled over me. What was happening? My mind raced with possibilities, but none of them felt grounded in reality. I had read enough horror novels to know that my situation was spiraling into a nightmare, but I had to keep it together. I had to think. The cameras. I could review the footage, ensure I wasn't being watched. I sprinted back through the aisles, my breath quickening with every step. The office was at the far end, tucked away behind stacks of boxes. I fumbled for the light switch, the familiar click providing a modicum of comfort. With shaking hands, I booted up the security system and pulled up the live feed. The grainy video flickered to life, showing the various angles of the warehouse. I shifted through the camera feeds, anxiety pooling in my gut as I scanned each frame. There was nothing, just shadows and the mundane stillness of the night. But as I flipped to a new angle, something caught my eye. On the east side, a figure was moving, just a fleeting shadow, but unmistakable. My eyes widened in horror as I watched it approach the door I hadn't opened. I leaned closer, breathless, as the figure paused, tilting its head slightly, as if looking directly at the camera. My heart raced, and I pressed the pause button, feeling sick. I couldn't see their face, but I knew they were watching me. The tension in my chest exploded. I needed to leave, to get the hell out of there. I turned around and bolted for the door, my pulse roaring in my ears. But as I reached for the handle, my phone buzzed again, and I froze. "You can't escape. Not tonight." The voice in my head screamed to run, but my body wouldn't respond. I stood there, paralyzed by terror and uncertainty. I gripped the handle tight, ready to yank it open, but the fear that someone would be waiting for me outside held me in place. The lights flickered overhead, the sound of distant thunder rumbling through the warehouse. I had to make a choice. Stay and confront whatever was watching me, or flee into the night, where anything could be waiting. With a deep breath that felt like shards of glass, I prepared to let instinct guide me, even if it led me into the darkness beyond. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting shaky shadows on the walls of the warehouse. I rubbed my eyes, trying to drive out the remnants of sleep that clung to me like cobwebs. The clock on the wall ticked monotonously, its sound echoing in the cavernous space, a reminder that I was alone, at least, that's what I thought. The messages had begun a week ago, just as the calm of the night shift had lulled me into a false sense of security. At first, they were innocuous, noting the mundane details of my evening. "You just finished checking the inventory," the first one had said, sent just after I had completed my rounds. I had dismissed it as a prank, an ill-timed joke from a colleague. But each shift brought new messages, more specific, more invasive. "Do you really think they care that you're here alone?" had appeared on my phone last night, chilling me to the core. I had glanced around the empty expanse of metal racks and dusty crates, feeling eyes on me, though I was the only one present. I had laughed it off then, a nervous chuckle that echoed through the silence. My laughter felt hollow, like a mistake. Tonight, however, the air was thick with something I couldn't quite place. The shadows seemed to thicken and stretch, as if animated by some unseen force. I had made it through the first 2 hours of my shift, but restlessness gnawed at me. After finishing my first inventory check, I decided to take a short break, hoping to shake off the uneasiness that had settled deep in my bones. I stepped out into the corridor leading to the break room, my footsteps heavy against the concrete floor. The cold air from the aging HVAC system brushed past me, and I found myself shivering despite the warmth of my jacket. I reached for my phone, a familiar routine that had become more of a crutch than a tool. But as I unlocked the screen, the message I received caused a breath to hitch in my throat. "I see you walking down the hallway." I froze, my heart racing, blood pounding in my ears. My eyes darted to the warehouse entrance, expecting to see someone standing there, looking back at me. The darkness seemed to pulse in response, hiding secrets I couldn't fathom. I wasn't alone. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, no longer an abstract idea, but a visceral truth that gnawed at my sanity. I hurried toward the break room, my pulse echoing in my head. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the dim light flickering slightly above me. I moved to the small table and sank into a chair, trying to breathe normally. I stared at my phone, willing it to ring with something other than the foreboding messages. Another vibration sent my heart racing anew. I picked it up reluctantly. "You're not safe in there," the new text read, and I could almost feel the breath of whoever sent it brushing against my neck. I shot to my feet, my chair scraping against the concrete with a screech that made me wince. "Who are you?" I typed out before hitting send. But as I hesitated, a dull sound echoed from the outer warehouse, a clatter of metal that sent a jolt of fear through me. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but I was utterly alone. I edged toward the door, every fiber of my being screaming to retreat, yet something compelled me to investigate. I pushed the door open, stepping back into the gloom of the warehouse. The distant sound echoed again, more pronounced this time, like something heavy dropping to the ground. I glanced back at the break room, an irrational urge to return washing over me, but I forced myself forward. I crept through the aisles of crates and boxes, my senses heightened. Each step felt agonizingly loud, every inhalation a reminder of the silence around me. The warehouse, once a mundane place filled with the soft hum of machinery and the lonely sound of my footsteps, was now a labyrinth of shadows and hidden terrors. Look down. Another text appeared just as I reached the end of an aisle. My breath caught in my throat as I froze, my eyes slipping to the concrete floor. A small, dark object lay there, a smartphone, its screen cracked but still illuminated, the battery dying slowly. I recognized it. It belonged to Tony, the other night shift employee. I felt sick. What had happened to him? My mind raced back to the last time I had seen him. We had joked about the strangeness of the night shift, shared stories about ghost sightings and urban legends. But this wasn't a joke anymore. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone lurking behind me, but the shadows remained still. Why did you have to look? The message flashed across my screen, but the sender's name was still just a series of numbers. My heart sank. I was not just being watched, I was being toyed with. I started to back away slowly, retracing my steps, when a sudden crash erupted from the back of the warehouse. My breath quickened, fueling a primal urge to flee. I turned on my heel and sprinted toward the nearest exit, adrenaline surging through me. The floor felt uneven beneath my feet, each rush step echoing my growing terror. I reached the exit and pushed through the heavy door, gasping for air as I stumbled into the cool night. The warehouse loomed behind me, dark and foreboding, but I felt the relief of the open space. My phone buzzed again, and I almost didn't want to look. Did you think you could escape? The words sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't stop to think. I ran toward my car, the dread pooling in my stomach like a solid weight. I could feel it, the pervasive sense that whoever had been watching me was close behind, hidden in the shadows of the warehouse, waiting to make their next move. Story 5, Dead End. The evening sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the twisting back roads of Jefferson County. I had always found solace in the quiet of the countryside, but that evening, there was an uneasy stillness that tingled at the back of my mind. I was driving home from a friend's house, my car filled with the remnants of a half-eaten pizza and the distant echo of laughter. As I turned onto a particularly narrow road, the trees closed in around me, their gnarled branches stretching out like fingers clutching at the sky. I had my windows down, the warm breeze tousling my hair, and I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the ominous feeling that had settled over me. The radio played a playlist of soft indie songs, the kind that lulled you into a false sense of security. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was later than I had intended. I made a mental note to take the next left to cut through a shortcut that could shave a few minutes off my journey. The road narrowed further and became more twisted, the asphalt cracked and uneven, with weeds creeping up from the edges. I didn't see another car for miles, and it felt like I had driven into another world. Just as I rounded a sharp bend, a car appeared suddenly in front of me. I slammed on the brakes, swerving slightly to avoid a collision, my heart racing as I narrowly avoided the other vehicle. I caught a glimpse of the driver, a young man whose expression morphed into a scowl as I passed. In my rearview mirror, I saw the headlights of the car shift abruptly. It veered sharply to follow me, and I felt a jolt of panic. They were gaining on me, the sound of honking horn echoing in the stillness. I glanced at my speedometer. I was already driving too fast. My mind raced with thoughts of what I had done wrong, and an instinctual dread curled in my stomach. The car behind me, black and menacing, was now tailgating me, its headlights blinding in the dusk. I could see shadows of 3 men leaning aggressively against the window, their faces twisted in mockery as they taunted me with hollers and laughter that ricocheted in my ears. I could feel sweat beading on my forehead, and I gripped the steering wheel tightly as I pressed the accelerator harder. I turned off the main road, desperate for a place to escape. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm as I spotted a flickering light in the distance, a gas station. Its neon sign buzzed annoyingly, but it felt like a beacon of safety. I pushed the gas pedal down harder, praying the men would break off their pursuit. As I pulled into the dimly lit lot, I barely had time to shut off the engine before I jumped out of the car. I sprinted toward the entrance, the sound of gravel crunching beneath my shoes drowned out by the pounding in my ears. I flung open the door, sending a small bell jangling. Inside, the station was stale and dimly lit, the smell of old oil and something metallic lingering in the air. The cashier, a disheveled man with a thick beard, looked up from his phone, his eyes widening as I rushed in. I gasped for breath, my heart still racing as I glanced frantically over my shoulder, half expecting to see the car burst into the lot. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gruff and low. I opened my mouth to respond, but the sound of honking from outside sliced through the air. I turned, peering through the glass door just as the black car skidded into the parking lot, tires screeching against the pavement. My stomach dropped. They had found me. The men piled out of the vehicle, their figures large and intimidating. They laughed, their voices mingling into a sinister chorus. It felt like a scene straight out of a nightmare. I stumbled back, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might burst. "Hey, there she is," one of them yelled, his voice echoing off the walls of the gas station. My blood ran cold. I looked around, searching for a way out, but the cashier was frozen, eyes wide, as if he too felt the weight of their menace. "Call the police," I yelled, desperation creeping into my voice. The cashier's fingers hesitated over the phone before he finally began to dial. I turned back to the door, pressing against the cool glass, my breath shallow as I watched the men advance. They approached slowly, menacingly, their laughter chilling me to the bone. I noticed one of them, a tall figure with a tattoo coiling around his forearm, grinning at me like a predator toying with its prey. "Come on out, sweetheart. We just want to talk," he said, his tone dripping with mock gentleness. "Please, leave me alone," I shouted, panic flooding my voice. I felt trapped, like a rabbit cornered by wolves. "Just a little chat," another chimed in, their laughter growing louder as they approached the door, hands shoved deep into their pockets, swaggering like they owned the world. The cashier finally spoke up, his voice shaky. "You guys need to leave." "She didn't mean to cut you off." "Shut up," the tattooed man barked, throwing a glare at the cashier that silenced him instantly. I could feel the tension thickening, wrapping around me like a noose. The door swung open with a creak as they pushed forward, laughter spilling into the gas station. My heart raced and I took a step back, ready to bolt if they made a move. There was nowhere to hide. I was trapped in a cage of my own making. I could see the embers of their intent flickering in their eyes, the amusement morphing into something much darker. My breath hitched as I stepped further back, weighing my options. I had to think, had to find a way to escape this. And that's when the lights flickered, plunging the room into deep shadows. The darkness wrapped around me, and I felt the first tendrils of fear grip me tightly as I realized that this was only the beginning of a nightmarish descent into the unknown. The air inside the gas station was thick with the scent of burnt coffee and stale snacks. I stood by the door, my heart racing, barely daring to breathe. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting an unsettling glow that made shadows dance along the walls. It felt as if time had stretched, the seconds morphing into minutes as I fought to steady my pulse. Outside, the sun had begun to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with strokes of purple and crimson. I could see the silhouettes of the men's car parked under the flickering light of the gas station sign, the engine idling softly. I could almost hear their laughter, muffled and eerie, as they exchanged taunts. My palms grew slick with sweat as I gripped the edge of the counter. After that bone-chilling moment on the road, when I had realized I had cut them off, I thought I could lose them on the winding back roads. But they had been relentless, their headlights blaring in my rearview mirror, illuminating the darkening landscape like a bad omen. My mind whirled with what-ifs, imagining the worst. I had barely made it to this gas station, praying that it would be my sanctuary. I turned to the cashier, a young woman with tired eyes and a bored expression, who was scrolling through her phone like she was oblivious to the situation outside. I cleared my throat, attempting to mask my fear with a brittle bravado. "Do you have a phone I could use? I need to call for help." She looked up, her face unchanging. "Phone's out of order. You can use the payphone outside if you want." Her tone was dismissive, as if my fear was a trivial thing in her world. I glanced out the window again, my heart sinking. The men were no longer laughing. They had gotten out of their car. They stood together, leaning against the side of their vehicle, casting long shadows that reached toward the gas station like dark fingers. My stomach twisted. They were waiting for me, and there was no way I could make it to the payphone without risking a confrontation. "I really need to get out of here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Can you call the police or something?" Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she shook her head. "Not my job. You should have thought about that before you drove like a maniac." I felt a surge of anger, but it was drowned out by the more potent tide of fear. I was trapped, stranded in this desolate place with no one to help me. I took a deep breath and scanned the aisles of snacks and drinks, looking for something, anything that could give me an edge. I picked up a can of soda, its coldness a stark contrast to my heated skin. My hands trembled as I opened it, the hiss of carbonation breaking the silence. The cashier glanced at me, then returned to her screen, her indifference grating. I took a sip, the sugary sweetness doing nothing to quell the panic surging through me. Without thinking, I edged toward the door, drawn by an inexplicable urge to confront the situation. Maybe I could reason with them, explain that it was an accident, that I never meant to cut them off. I opened the door slightly, peering through the glass. One of the men, a towering figure with a scruff of beard, caught my eye. He lifted his head, locking onto my gaze with an unsettling grin that sent chills racing down my spine. I quickly stepped back, slamming the door shut. "Are they still out there?" I demanded, turning to the cashier. She shrugged, not offering any comfort. I needed a plan. I thought of my car, parked just a few feet away, but it felt like an impossible fortress surrounded by wolves. The thought of the engine humming to life while they loomed nearby was paralyzing. My eyes darted around the station, searching for an escape route. "Do you have a back exit?" I finally asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She rolled her eyes, gesturing lazily toward a door in the far corner, partially hidden behind a display of chips. "Yeah, but it leads to the alley. No one's gonna help you there." I didn't care. I had to take my chances. I moved quickly, my heart pounding as my footsteps echoed in the empty space. The vending machines hummed softly, and I could hear the faint sound of the men's voices merging with the murmur of the wind outside. I paused at the door, pressing my ear against it, hoping to gather some sense of their proximity. Laughter. The sound turned my stomach. They were close, too close. Summoning every ounce of courage, I pushed through the door, stepping into the cool, damp air of the alley. It smelled of grease and something sour, the ground slick beneath my shoes. I glanced back at the gas station, half expecting the cashier to come rushing out, but the door remained closed, sealing me and my fate. I instinctively moved toward the front of the building, keeping low and close to the wall. My heart thudded in my chest as I reached the corner, peering around it to catch sight of the men. They hadn't moved from their spot by the car, still exchanging crude jokes and slapping each other on the back as if they were at a party. Then one of them turned, glancing in my direction. A wave of panic washed over me. I ducked back behind the wall, adrenaline coursing through me like a wildfire. I couldn't go back inside. I would be trapped. But staying here felt equally hopeless. I could hear their laughter growing louder, mixed with the sound of footsteps crunching on gravel. "Hey! You think she's coming back?" one of them shouted, his voice dripping with menace. "Maybe she got scared and drove off," another replied, but I could hear the underlying doubt in his tone. What if they were right? What if I missed my chance to escape? With my heart racing and no other option in sight, I took a deep breath and prepared to make my move. I had to find a way out of this nightmare before it consumed me. The shadows grew longer as the last light of day slipped away, and with it, my hope of finding a way back to safety. The muffled thumping of my heart echoed in my ears like a war drum as I clutched the steering wheel tighter, the rubbery scent of the worn leather filling my senses. The gravel-strewn road stretched endlessly in front of me, flanked by dark silhouettes of trees that loomed like ancient sentinels. I had hoped that turning onto this secluded path would lead me to a charming little escape from the chaos of the city, but now I felt like I had plunged into a nightmare. The sun was nearly set, casting elongated shadows that flickered as my headlights pierced the murky darkness. I had seen the car behind me, a rusted pickup, heavy with rust and grime. At first, I hadn't thought much of it. But then, I had become acutely aware of the way it seemed to cling to my bumper, like a leech thirsty for blood. I remembered the moment my heart had dropped. I had glanced in my rearview mirror, and there they were, 4 men, wild-eyed and raucous, voices raised in laughter that seeped through the distance. Panic twisted in my stomach when I accidentally cut them off while maneuvering for a better trajectory around a pothole. What had been a small mistake turned into a grave error. Their headlights flared brighter, illuminating their faces with an eerie glow. I could see their features twisting into contempt, and I could hear the cacophony of horns and shouted curses, each syllable slicing through the twilight. Fear burned through my veins as I pressed down on the accelerator, the engine roaring defiantly. The dirt road narrowed, the trees enclosing around me like a trap. The pickup truck remained steadfast, relentless, its headlights a glaring reminder of my misstep. I could almost feel their eyes on me, sizing me up like prey. They were gaining on me closer, closer, until I could see the silhouette of one man leaning out of the passenger window, hollering something I couldn't comprehend over the cacophony. Desperation clawed at my throat. I had to find refuge, a way to escape this escalating nightmare. Just when I thought the situation could not grow more dire, I spotted a flicker of light ahead at a gas station, its sign barely illuminating the encroaching darkness. I took a sharp turn, gravel crunching beneath me, praying that my tires would hold on. I barely slowed down as I skidded to a stop outside the building, the fluorescent lights buzzing ominously. I jumped out of the car, my legs shaky beneath me. The 2 gas pumps stood sentinel, the air thick with the smell of old motor oil and diesel. My heart raced as I dashed towards the station's entrance, casting frantic glances over my shoulder. The pickup truck skidded to a halt, and I could see the men pouring out, their laughter echoing through the still evening air. The sliding glass door to the station barely closed behind me, and I stumbled inside, my breath coming in quick bursts. The attendant looked up from behind the counter, his eyes wide with confusion. I barely registered him, my focus consumed by the raucous laughter that drifted through the night air. "Please," I gasped, pointing towards the door. Before I could finish, the door swung open, the bells jingling ominously. The men entered, still laughing, the harsh light slicing through their shadows. I pressed myself against the wall, willing myself to merge into the shadows, to disappear entirely. "What do we have here?" one of them said, stepping forward, his features illuminated by the flickering lights. He was tall and bulky, tattoos snaking down his arms, a malevolence in his eyes that made my stomach turn. The attendant stood frozen, caught between confusion and fear, while the other men filled the space, filtering in like a dark cloud. They looked at me with a twisted sense of amusement, their grins widening. "What's the matter?" "Did you lose your way?" another taunted, taking a step closer. I could feel the weight of their stares, the predatory tension so thick it clung to me like a shroud. The attendant finally blinked, breaking the spell of silence. "Hey, you guys can't be here. You need to leave," he said, his voice shaky but rising with authority. "Oh, we're just having a bit of fun," the first man replied, his tone dripping with sarcasm. My heart raced as I felt the room grow smaller, the walls closing in, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead like a bad omen. "You shouldn't have cut us off," he continued, his gaze boring into mine. "But I suppose we can make it right." With each word, dread pulled in my stomach. I needed to act, to escape before they could close the distance. I snatched my phone from my pocket, fingers trembling as I dialed the police, praying they would answer in time. But one of the men saw me, and that glint of recognition ignited the situation. He lunged forward, swiping the phone from my hand and tossing it aside. "No one's coming to save you," he sneered, the other men closing ranks behind him, cutting off any avenue of escape. The attendant stepped forward, raising his hands. "You guys need to leave now. I'm calling the police." I could see their eyes flicker with danger, the air thickening with the anticipation of violence. Too many movements, too many choices left to make, and every second felt like it could erupt at any moment. Then, in the middle of their taunts, there was a sound, a low rumble in the distance. The unmistakable roar of an approaching vehicle. Relief washed over me, but just as quickly, fear twisted into my gut. What if it was too late? Would I be saved, or would it only worsen the storm brewing around us? "Looks like we've got company," one of the men said, tilting his head towards the door. I held my breath. The gloom of the night pressed in like a vice, and I braced for whatever horror was about to unfold, knowing that I couldn't remain a cornered rabbit forever. The gas station loomed ahead like a mirage, its flickering neon sign barely illuminating the cracked pavement beneath the weight of my desperation. I pulled into the lot, my heart hammering as the headlights of the car behind me flickered erratically, a predator circling its prey. The men in that vehicle, their shouts still echoing in my ears, had transformed my late-night drive into a twisted nightmare. I parked hastily, nerves jangling, and stumbled out of the car, glancing back at the road I had just fled. I half expected the car to come barreling in after me, their hatred palpable through the darkness. But it sat idling at the entrance of the station, their headlights cutting through the shadows, bathing the scene in an eerie glow. The sound of tires crunching on gravel was drowned out by my racing thoughts. "Stay calm," I whispered to myself. "You're safe here." The gas station was surprisingly well lit, but it felt like a trap. Its fluorescent lights buzzed incessantly, casting harsh shadows that danced like specters across the ground. A small, almost forgotten cafe attached to the side offered a flickering neon open sign, but I hesitated before entering, feeling the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me. As I stepped inside, the bell chimed overhead, and the dry air greeted me with the scent of stale coffee and greasy fries. A man stood behind the counter, his silhouette blurred by the dim lighting. He looked up, his eyes narrowing as he took in my disheveled appearance. I mustered a shaky smile. "Can I use your phone?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I think I need to call for help." The man studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Sure, but we don't have any service out here." You can use the landline if you want. He gestured toward the phone on the wall, his face unreadable. Without waiting for permission, I approached the phone, my heart still racing. Dialing 911 felt like a futile act, but I had to try. I punched in the numbers, praying for a connection, but the line remained dead, a mocking silence filling the air. I slammed the receiver down, frustration boiling beneath the surface. "What about your cell service?" I asked, turning back to the clerk. "I need to get out of here." He shook his head, almost apologetically. "No signal for miles." "You're not the first to complain." That's when a sound cut through the oppressive atmosphere, the unmistakable roar of an engine. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the car had followed me. I dashed to the window, heart racing, and saw them, the same men from earlier, their faces now illuminated by the gas station lights. They stood outside their vehicle, laughter echoing in the stillness, the sound laced with menace. "Hey! You!" One of them shouted, pointing directly at me. "Come on out. We just want to talk." I recoiled, my back pressing against the cool glass of the window. "Call the cops." I pleaded, turning back to the clerk, but he remained strangely unmoved, his face carved from stone. "Not much I can do," he replied flatly. "This is a quiet place." "Quiet? You call this quiet?" My voice was rising, panic surging within me. "They're going to hurt me." The men outside grew louder, taunting, their voices swirling around me like a storm. "Hey, lady. We just want to help. You think you can just cut us off and drive away?" I looked back at the clerk, desperation in my eyes, but he turned away, busying himself with an old magazine as if to say he wasn't involved. I felt utterly alone in my fear. My instinct screamed at me to run, but to where? The only door between me and those men felt like a flimsy barrier. I considered my options and spotted a door behind the counter, a narrow passage leading to what I presumed were the storage rooms. It was a risk, but I was out of time. "I'm leaving," I announced, and before the clerk could respond, I darted toward the door. "Hey! Where do you think you're going?" one of the men yelled, and I felt adrenaline surge through me as I yanked the door open and slipped inside. The storage area was cramped and dark, musty boxes stacked haphazardly around me. I pressed my back against the cold wall, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. I could hear their voices more clearly now, laughter mingling with crude jokes. They were coming closer. "Come on, lady. Just let us talk to you. We're not going to bite." As if that was supposed to be reassuring. I could sense the door to the store still ajar, my lifeline, but now it felt like a gateway to hell. The men resumed their taunts, footsteps echoing ominously as they approached the entrance. I fumbled in the dark, searching for anything, any tool I could use to defend myself. My fingers brushed against the cool metal of a pipe wrench, and I grabbed it, feeling its weight. "Just go away," I shouted, my voice trembling, echoing weakly in the confined space. Suddenly, the main door swung open, and their shadows spilled into the room like a tide. They were laughing, eyes glinting with a predatory eagerness. "What's the matter, sweetheart? You afraid of a little chat?" I tightened my grip on the wrench, heart pounding as they stepped closer, oblivious to the threat that hung in the air. I was trapped, with nowhere to go, but I wasn't ready to submit. I would fight if it came to that. "Get away from me," I shouted, stepping forward, the wrench raised like a makeshift weapon. They paused, surprise flashing across their faces, but it quickly morphed into amusement. "Oh, look at her. She thinks she's tough." I could feel the tide of my own fear pushing against me, wanting to swallow me whole, but I pushed back, fueled by a desperate urge to survive. The laughter didn't fade, but with every heartbeat, I prepared myself for the inevitable clash. In that cramped space, my world became focused, narrowed down to the moments that would decide my fate. Survival hinged not on luck, but on this fragile resolve that clung to me like a lifeline. The night stretched out like an endless chasm, dark and forbidding. Only the beam of my headlights sliced through the thick veil of fog that wrapped around the empty road. Each mile felt like a step deeper into a nightmare. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, heart pounding. The gas station I'd spotted on the map was still a few minutes away, but each second felt like an eternity. What had started as an innocent drive through the countryside had turned into a spiral of dread. I tried to shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The radio buzzed with static, adding to the oppressive silence that surrounded me. I glanced in my rearview mirror, and my stomach dropped. A set of headlights flickered behind me, too close for comfort. I had made a mistake. Coming here alone had been a bad idea. The feeling of being watched crept in, wrapping around my spine like a cold hand. My foot pressed harder on the gas. I had only intended to take the scenic route, an old habit from my childhood road trips. But the winding roads and the darkened woods had quickly become a labyrinth of shadows. Then, in a moment of distraction, I miscalculated my turn. I swerved into the other lane, narrowly missing an oncoming car. My pulse raced, and panic surged through me. I looked back, and that's when I saw them, 4 men in a pickup truck, their faces illuminated by the glow of the dashboard lights. They honked furiously, their laughter harsh and mocking. I tried to shake off the unease, but their aggressive gestures ignited a primal fear within me. I pushed the accelerator further down, desperate to put distance between us. Instead, they fell in line behind me, their headlights blinding, the honks deafening. I could hear their shouts, muffled by my closed windows, but the malice in their tones sent a shiver down my spine. "Hey! Get off the road," one of them bellowed, and it felt as if his voice pierced right through the metal of my car. I could feel their eyes on me, even as the thick fog obscured everything else. My mind raced. Was there anywhere I could turn? The road was narrow, flanked by dense woods, and I had no idea how long the chase could go on. My instincts screamed at me to find safety. Just as I spotted a flickering neon sign in the distance, another honk shattered the night. I pressed the gas pedal harder, praying that I could lose them before I reached the gas station. I pulled into the lot, tires screeching against the gravel, heart thumping louder than the engine. The gas station was a relic of the past, with peeling paint and a flickering light that barely illuminated the entrance. It felt abandoned, but I had no time to ponder its isolation. I leaped out of the car and sprinted toward the door, my breath coming in short gasps. "Get in!" I shouted at the elderly attendant behind the counter, who seemed unfazed by my panic. He merely raised an eyebrow, as if deciding whether this frantic girl was worth his time. The door swung shut behind me, and I turned to face the window, my chest heaving. The pickup truck rolled in a moment later, the headlights sweeping across the gas station like a searchlight. My heart sank as I watched the men pile out, laughing and shouting, their figures silhouetted against the glow. They lingered outside, leaning against the truck and exchanging cruel taunts. "Nice driving, lady," one of them shouted, a thick-set man with a baseball cap. The others joined in, their cheers echoing around the parking lot. I felt the bile rise in my throat. "Call the police." I pleaded with the attendant, who finally looked up from his newspaper, his expression still indifferent. "Not worth the trouble," he said, shrugging. I glared at him, desperation mounting. Why wasn't he doing anything? It was then that I noticed the door I had assumed was locked. It creaked open, and I turned to see another figure, a wiry man with sunken eyes who stepped inside casually. The tension in the air shifted, and suddenly, the room felt smaller, the shadows deeper. "Looks like you've got company," he said, nodding toward the window. I turned, fear choking me. The men outside had split into two groups, and one was approaching the entrance, their sneers growing sharper. "Let me out," I whispered urgently, panic rising like bile in my throat. "Please, just let me out." The attendant merely pointed toward the back of the store, and I glanced at the narrow aisle lined with dusty snacks and sodas. The tension grew heavier as I realized the attendant had no intention of helping. He wouldn't lift a finger. "Nowhere to run, sweetheart," one of the men called, his voice laced with cruel amusement. I backed away from the counter, my breathing quickening as my eyes darted around the store. There was no way out, no escape except for those men. I fought to keep my composure, wishing I could slip into the shadows, disappear until they lost interest. The door swung open wider, and another man stepped in, tall and broad-shouldered, blocking my view. "Look who we found," he said, smirking. "Thought you could lose us?" My heart raced as I drew a shaky breath, the air thick with impending violence. I had to think fast. I turned and dashed toward the aisle of shelves. My instincts took over as I pushed through the narrow space between them, praying for an opening. The men laughed, their voices booming like thunder as they followed. I could hear their footsteps thumping behind me, the sound a harbinger of what was to come. The gas station, once a beacon of safety, now felt like a trap. My pulse pounded in my ears as I reached the back of the store, looking for any semblance of an escape. But there was nothing. Only the dim glow of flickering lights, and the weight of their laughter filling the air around me as darkness closed in. Story 6: Shadows by the Water. The sun hung like a molten coin above the horizon as we piled into the car, excitement bubbling in our chests. My wife, Lisa, had suggested the trip to Lake Waverly, a place we loved visiting before the children were born. Now that they were old enough, we figured a day at the lake would make for some much-needed family bonding. The drive was filled with laughter, the kids squabbling over who would sit where, while I focused on the winding road ahead. The scent of pine and wildflowers drifted in through the open windows, mixing with the sweet anticipation of the day ahead. When we finally arrived, the lake stretched before us like a shimmering blue blanket, inviting us in. As we set up our picnic near the water's edge, I noticed a figure standing off to the side, partially obscured by the trees. He was tall, clad in dark clothing, and seemed to be watching us, though his face remained hidden in shadow. I brushed it off as my imagination. Surely, it was just a passerby enjoying the scenery. The day unfolded as expected. The kids chased after dragonflies, their laughter mingling with the gentle lapping of water against the shore. Lisa and I reveled in the sound of nature, sharing stories and planning our next family vacation. Yet, every so often, my gaze would drift back to the stranger who had not moved from his spot. My unease grew, but I forced myself to focus on the joy of the moment. As the sun climbed higher, I stole a few glances at the man. He hadn't changed position, but now I could see his face hard and expressionless, his eyes dark and unfathomable. The feeling of being watched gnawed at the back of my mind. I mentioned it to Lisa, who laughed it off, saying I was being paranoid. "It's a public lake, honey," she said with a smile. "Relax." I tried to relax, but the figure lingered there like a shadow. After a while, he began to move, stepping slowly towards us. The closer he got, the more I noticed his unsettling demeanor. His clothes were tattered, his hair long and unkempt, and there was something almost predatory in the way he regarded our family. My heart raced, but I forced myself to act normal. "Kids, why don't you go see if you can find some cohocks by the water?" I suggested, keeping my voice steady. They scampered off before I could change my mind. As they played, the man's presence encroached upon my thoughts. He ambled along the shore, his eyes locked on us. I felt the urge to confront him, to ask if he needed help or if he was lost, but Lisa's laughter echoed through the air, pulling me back. I joined her in the picnic, trying to shake off the feeling of dread curling around my stomach. When evening began to creep in, the sky transformed into a canvas of deep oranges and purples. Families around us started to pack up, and a heavy silence settled over the lake. The stranger was now closer, standing at the water's edge, his gaze unwavering. It wasn't until I turned back to our picnic that I realized our car was parked not far from the shore. "Let's start cleaning up," I said, keeping an eye on the man who now seemed to be moving in our direction. Lisa nodded, but her attention remained on the children, oblivious to my growing concern. As we folded the blankets, I glanced over my shoulder again. The man had crossed the distance, his presence looming over our picnic setup. My stomach twisted. Something was wrong. He stood there, just outside the soft glow of our lantern, silent and still. "Can I help you?" I finally called out, the words hanging heavy in the air. He didn't respond, didn't even blink. Instead, he stepped closer, still observing us with those dark eyes, as if measuring the distance between us. I felt a surge of adrenaline. "This is a private area. Maybe you should move along," I said, trying to sound authoritative. "Dad, who's that?" my son asked, breaking the tension. "Just a person passing by," I said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. The man's gaze flickered to the children, and I instinctively stepped closer to them, a visceral need to protect. Then, just like that, he turned away and walked back toward the trees. I exhaled, feeling foolish for letting my imagination run wild, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I instructed Lisa to gather the kids and head to the car. The air felt thick, oppressive, as we shuffled toward the parking lot, the shadows growing longer around us. As we reached the car, my heart sank. The driver's side door hung slightly ajar, and the keys were missing from my pocket. Panic surged through me. I quickly checked the back seat to see if they had fallen, and that's when I saw a glint of something metallic near the wheel wells. "Someone tampered with our car," I said, my voice low and urgent. "What do you mean?" Lisa asked, her brow furrowing. Before I could answer, I spotted the stranger emerging from the darkness, his attention back on us, eyes glinting like the metal I had just seen. The children were oblivious, giggling and wriggling in the back seat, but I felt the weight of the night closing in. The lake lapped at the shore, the only sound in the heavy silence. "Get in the car," I urged, my voice sharp, but I didn't move myself. He took another step forward, and I felt like I was standing on the edge of a precipice. The shadows deepened around us, and I realized that we were no longer just enjoying a day at the lake. We were being watched not by someone passing by, but by something that had no intention of leaving us alone. The sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows that stretched across the water and turned the sky into a palette of deep oranges and tired purples. The laughter of my children, Elena and Ben, drifted over the soft lapping of the lake's waves. For a moment, I allowed the warmth of the day to cradle me, pushing aside the strange feeling that had clung to my thoughts since we first spotted him. The man by the trees, his eyes locked onto us, still haunted my mind. "Mom, watch this." Ben called out, splashing water as he attempted to impress his sister. The innocence of their play was a balm against the unease that chewed at my insides, but I couldn't shake the image of that stranger. He hadn't moved away from the treeline since we arrived, his presence like a dark cloud looming over our family's picnic. "Elena, try to keep your brother out of trouble," I said, forcing a smile as I settled down on the blanket, where remnants of our lunch were quickly disappearing. The aroma of sandwiches, chips, and fruit mingled with the scent of damp earth and pine. It should have been a perfect day, the kind I had dreamed of during long hours at work, yet I felt an invisible weight pressing down. I glanced back at the trees. He was there, still. His form was less defined now, blending with the shadows, but I felt his presence as keenly as the chill in the air. My gaze lingered a moment too long, and as if sensing my scrutiny, he turned his head slightly. Our eyes locked, and a jolt of cold terror shot through me. I nearly shouted to my husband, Mark, who was setting up the grill, but I swallowed the words. I didn't want to alarm the kids, nor did I want to seem paranoid. "Can we go swimming yet?" Elena asked, breaking my focus. The sparkle of her excitement pulled me back to the present. "Please." "Just a little longer," I replied, watching Ben make a triumphant leap into the lake like a cannonball, splashing water everywhere. I smiled for them but felt my heart racing as I stole another glance at the stranger. The man had moved closer. Now he stood at the edge of the trees, his features vague but distinctly watchful. "Hey, kids. Time to get out." Mark's voice boomed, disrupting my spiraling thoughts. "We're going to make some hot dogs." The kids groaned in protest but flopped onto the sandy shore, dripping wet and giggling. I felt Mark's hand on my shoulder, grounding me. "You okay?" he asked, his brow furrowed, and I nodded, my smile strained. As the fire crackled and sent up sparks, I forced myself to focus on the warmth of the flames and the light of the evening. We roasted our hot dogs, the rich smell mixing with the earthy scent of the lake. The kids reveled in their treats, their laughter ringing out, but every so often, I would glance back at the tree-line. The man was now standing at the water's edge, his figure stark against the fading light, watching us. "Mom, can we go back in?" Ben begged, his optimism unwavering. I hesitated, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "Not right now, buddy. Let's eat first." The evening wore on, and the shadows stretched across the landscape, swallowing the last remnants of daylight. The air turned cooler, making me shiver, but it was the sight of the stranger that truly chilled me. He had moved again, inching closer, his posture relaxed yet predatory, as if he were sizing us up. As we finished our dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped. The road back to civilization was winding and remote. Our car, parked at the edge of the lot, felt like a distant sanctuary. The children played by the water, and I watched, torn between allowing them their joy and the suffocating anxiety that gripped me. "Why don't you take the kids around and collect some rocks for skipping?" Mark suggested, oblivious to my turmoil. "I'll clean up here." I glanced back toward the stranger one last time. He hadn't moved, but I sensed he was watching, waiting. A shiver ran down my spine, and I nodded, forcing myself to smile for Mark and the kids. "Sure," I said, steering them away from the shore. The gravel crunched underfoot as we walked further along the edge of the lake. I kept glancing back toward our picnic site, half expecting to see the man materializing closer. The kids bent down, giggling and searching for smooth stones, but my mind was elsewhere. "Mom?" Elena's voice broke through my spiraling thoughts. "Can we go back now?" I looked down at her, at the innocence in her eyes, and felt a wave of guilt crash over me. "Let's just find a few more rocks, okay?" I forced cheerfulness into my tone, but fear clawed at me, insistent and unyielding. The sun had fully set, and the first stars began to blink in the darkening sky. A heightened sense of dread gripped me as we turned back toward our spot. That's when I noticed the shadows had moved. "Where's Dad?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "He was right there," Ben said, pointing to the empty space where Mark had been. My heart raced as I turned, scanning the picnic area. It was deserted, the remnants of our meal littered on the blanket, but Mark was gone. "Stay close to me, guys," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The unease, now a tangible entity, wrapped around me as we made our way back. Then, I saw it, a figure, cloaked in darkness, emerging from the tree line. My heart stopped. The stranger was there, and I felt the air grow heavy around us. The car loomed in the distance, but we were still exposed, alone on the shore, and I knew we had to confront him. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows across the shore, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. I tried to shake off the unease that had settled within me since we'd first spotted the man by the trees. My family was enjoying the last remnants of our day at the lake, their laughter melding with the gentle lapping of water against the rocks. My husband, Mark, threw pebbles into the lake, their plunks echoing like little ripples of normalcy, while our children, Sarah and Ben, chased each other with shrieks of joy that felt increasingly out of place. But that man, I couldn't stop glancing at him. He stood like a dark sentinel at the edge of the woods, watching us in that unsettling, unmoving way. I thought I saw him shift slightly as the kids splashed in the shallows, but I couldn't be sure. Each time I stole a look, I felt the weight of his gaze pressing on me. "Mom, look!" Sarah shouted, waving her arms. She caught a dragonfly, its iridescent wings shimmering in the fading light. I forced a smile and turned my attention back to them, trying to drown out the creeping sense of dread that clung to my thoughts. "Let's take a picture," Mark exclaimed, pulling out his phone. He aimed it at the children, who posed with exaggerated smiles, their innocence framing the backdrop of the lake. I chuckled, trying to focus on the joy of that moment, but my heart wasn't in it. I felt a twinge of guilt for not being fully present, yet the man's silhouette in my peripheral vision kept tugging at my mind. As the sun finally slipped beneath the edge of the world, the air turned cooler, and the atmosphere shifted. Shadows stretched further across the ground, and the once vibrant colors of the day faded into a ghostly twilight. I glanced over again, and this time, the man had moved. He was closer, just at the tree line, his face obscured by the gathering darkness. "Guys, maybe we should head back soon," I said, my voice edged with apprehension. Mark raised an eyebrow but nodded, sensing my discomfort. "All right, let's pack up," he said, the playful tone in his voice replaced by a hint of seriousness as he glanced toward the trees. The children groaned, but they complied, slowly gathering their things. I walked toward the cooler, my heart racing. I felt like I was being pursued, the man's gaze heavy on my back. As we packed the last of the items, I dared another look. He stood still, but now his head was slightly tilted, as if he were studying us. I felt a chill race down my spine. There was something wrong about the way he watched us, something predatory. "Let's get to the car," I murmured, trying to keep my voice steady. The kids sensed my tension, their faces crumpling into frowns, but they followed me down the path to our vehicle. The gravel crunched beneath our feet, and I tried to focus on that sound, grounding myself in the noise as we walked. Arriving at the car, a sense of relief washed over me. Mark opened the trunk to stow the cooler, and I quickly climbed into the front seat, glancing again at the tree line. The man was gone. I exhaled sharply, but the relief was short-lived as I noticed the car's interior felt off, almost claustrophobic in the dim light fading around us. "Did you lock the doors, Rebecca?" Mark asked, peering inside. Panic clawed at my chest. I had locked the doors. I was sure of it. Hadn't I? "Yeah, I think so," I said, fumbling to check. My finger trembled as I pressed the lock button. The soft click echoed in the stillness as I scanned the area again. My heart sank when I caught a flicker of movement from the corner of my eye. There he was, standing at the edge of the trees, just beyond the reach of the car's headlights. "Mark," I whispered, gripping his arm. He turned, following my gaze, and I saw the brief look of confusion shift to concern. The man was watching us once again, his posture rigid and unyielding. It was as if he was waiting for something. "Stay here," Mark instructed, his voice low and firm. He stepped out of the car, leaving the door slightly ajar. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream at him to come back, to get inside, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I watched him walk toward the man, each step heavy with a growing sense of dread. "Hey!" Mark called out, his voice steady but strained. "What do you want?" The man remained silent, but I could see the outline of his face now, a gaunt figure framed by the trees. He simply stared, his eyes reflecting the last glimmers of light like dark pools of ink. My pulse quickened as I felt the weight of his gaze turn toward me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were no longer alone in our little world by the lake. "Mark." I finally managed to croak out, desperation ripping through me. I wanted to pull him back, to drag him away from this stranger who seemed to exude an aura of danger. "Just stay put, Rebecca," he shouted without looking back, his attention fixed on the man. My heart raced, a primal instinct screaming at me that we were in over our heads. But then, without warning, we heard the sound, the unmistakable crunch of gravel underfoot. I glanced down and froze. My stomach dropped as I saw the rear tires of our car, the very tires that had been perfectly still moments ago, now appeared to be slashed, a wicked streak of darkness glistening in the fading light. "Get back!" I shouted, panic consuming me. I slammed the door shut and locked it, but my eyes remained glued to Mark, who stood frozen, oblivious to the horror creeping in from behind him. The man's face twisted into a malicious grin, and I felt the icy grip of fear tighten around my heart. The day had slipped into night, and we were trapped, surrounded by shadows and an unknown terror, forced to confront the stranger at the lake. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a dusky pallor over the lake. Shadows elongated, creeping toward the water's edge where we had spent the day indulging in laughter, splashes, and the sweet aroma of burnt hot dogs. But now, as the final traces of daylight surrendered to the impending night, an unsettling tension hung thick in the air. I had kept glancing at the man. He hadn't moved much since midday, but his eyes had not left us, even when we splashed around in the water, oblivious to the unease settling in my stomach. I thought little of him at first, just a strange man in tattered clothes, perhaps looking for solace by the lake. I had tried to brush off my concerns, attributing them to an overactive imagination. But the way he stood, rigid and unblinking, gnawed at my thoughts. "Let's pack up," I had said when the last of the daylight began to fade. The kids whined, reluctant to leave the water, but I could no longer ignore the chill crawling up my spine. The smell of lakeweed mixed with a rising sense of dread that I couldn't shake. "Just a little longer," my daughter, Lily, pleaded. Her voice was sweet, but it only served to amplify my anxiety. I glanced back at the man. He had taken a few steps closer, just enough to make my heart race. His gaunt face remained expressionless, but there was an intensity in his gaze that unsettled me. "Fine. 5 more minutes," I conceded, hoping to appease Lily while I considered our next move. The last thing I wanted was to alarm her or her brother, James, but their little faces reflected blissful ignorance of the lurking stranger. As the final rays of sunlight faded into a bruised blue twilight, the atmosphere shifted. The chirping crickets grew louder, as if mocking the silence that clung to our little family. I couldn't help but notice how the man had edged closer again, nearly halfway down the shore now, still watching, still silent. Anxiety wormed its way into my thoughts. I needed us to be safe. "Okay, time to go," I announced, my voice louder than intended. The children groaned but obeyed. We swiftly gathered our things, the sound of rustling bags and splashing water mixed with the distant call of an owl marking the encroaching night. "Dad, can we swim a bit more?" James asked, eyes wide with eagerness. I shook my head firmly, my gut twisting. "No, buddy. It's dark now. We've had our fun. Let's get back." As we trudged up the shore toward our car, I noticed the man had moved again. Closest yet, a figure suspended in stillness, cloaked in shadows. My heart raced erratically, each thump echoing in my ears louder than the rhythmic lapping of water against the shore. I fumbled with the keys in my pocket, each jingle of metal a reminder of the unease that threatened to drown me. "Why's that guy staring at us?" James asked, his innocent curiosity slicing through the thick tension. "He's probably just resting," I managed, but even to my own ears, it sounded hollow. I forced a smile, though dread gnawed at my insides. I glanced back, and the man had taken a few more steps forward, his eyes glinting in the fading light. "Let's hurry," I said, urgency in my voice now. The crunch of gravel underfoot felt louder than it should as we approached the car. The children climbed in, eager to escape the darkening shore. I turned the key in the ignition, and the engine sputtered to life, that familiar sound offering little comfort. But something was wrong. The headlights flickered dismally, illuminating the area just enough for me to see that the man had come even closer, just a handful of feet away now, his focus unwavering. I felt a surge of ice water run through my veins, and I cut the engine. "Stay here," I told the kids, forcing calmness into my voice. I stepped out of the car, barely closing the door behind me. "Hey!" I called, trying to sound authoritative, though it was shaky in the stillness. "You need to leave." He didn't respond at first, merely took a step closer. I could see his face better now, sunken cheeks, unkempt hair falling over his forehead, clothes that hung from his bony frame. But it was his eyes that captured me. They were piercing, dark, and impossibly vacant, like a void that threatened to swallow everything. "Why are you here?" I demanded, though inside, I trembled. The air grew thick with tension, almost tangible as it wrapped around us. Slowly, the man raised a hand, pointing at me. "You took something," he rasped, voice low and gravelly, as if it had not been used in years. "I'm sorry. I don't understand," I stammered, feeling the world tilt slightly. "Something you took from me," he repeated, stepping closer still. I could barely breathe as he moved into the beam of light from the car, revealing the smudged silhouette of his features, a grotesque mask in the fading light. My stomach churned, a primal instinct roaring to life within me. The children were still inside, oblivious to the danger. I needed to protect them. "Get away from my family," I shouted, more fiercely than I intended. The man paused, his gaze shifting ever so slightly as if he were deliberating. "You don't understand. It was never just yours." "Please," I said, desperation seeping into my tone, "just go." For a heartbeat, he seemed to consider my words. I could feel the pulsating fear, a primal warning that told me to flee. But before I could act, he lunged forward, and I stumbled back, my heart thundering in my chest. The shrill cries of the children pierced the night, and as I turned to reach for them, the world went dark. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the water as dusk swallowed the warmth of the day. My heart raced as I gripped the edge of our picnic blanket, the soft fabric catching at my fingertips like a warning. The man had shifted again, inching closer with each passing moment, his figure a dark smudge against the fading light. I tried to shake off the discomfort creeping through me, telling myself that he was just another visitor, enjoying the evening peace of the lake. But it was more than that. The intensity of his stare was palpable, as if he was cataloging every detail of our family, every laugh and every happy exchange. I glanced at my parents, their carefree banter ringing hollow in my ears. Dad was busy packing the cooler, oblivious to the uninvited audience, while Mom took photos, her laughter punctuating the serene evening. I wanted to scream for them to look, to see the man standing there, but I couldn't bring myself to interrupt the moment they were having. He was taller than most, his clothes dark and ragged, blending seamlessly with the encroaching twilight. In the past hour, he had migrated from behind a tree to the rocks at the edge of the lake, and now he hovered just beyond the reach of our light, like a specter awaiting the right moment to strike. My mind reeled from the implications, launching into an array of paranoid possibilities. What did he want? Why was he watching us? The reality of the situation began to settle deep in my chest, a heavy weight of unease that turned the picnic into a farce. I glanced back at my parents, forcing a smile as I thought of some distraction, something to alleviate the tension coiling within me. But just as I opened my mouth to suggest we head back to the car, the man moved again. This time, he stepped closer, his movements deliberate and calculated. My breath hitched in my throat as he emerged from the shadows, revealing a gaunt face framed by unkempt hair. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I instinctively took a step back, as if the distance could protect me. "Is everything all right, honey?" My mom's voice pierced through the haze of my fear, concern lining her brow as she caught my expression. I wanted to tell her, to urge her to look, but the words were lodged in my throat. Instead, I forced a nod and forced my gaze back to the water. But he was closer now, standing at the edge of the shoreline, his eyes fixated on us. The dying light reflected off the surface of the lake, illuminating the glistening water between us and him. I could feel the tension crackling in the air, thick enough to choke on. My dad finally caught sight of the stranger, his jovial manner evaporating as confusion clouded his features. "Who's that?" he asked, his voice steady but with an edge of irritation. I could see the stranger's mouth twitch into a semblance of a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. There was something unnerving about it, as if he found amusement in our discomfort. The entire scene felt surreal, like a waking nightmare creeping closer as the shadows lengthened. "Probably just another local," Mom said, trying to dismiss the tension. But I could see her resolve begin to falter as she observed him more closely. The stranger turned away from us, staring out at the lake as if lost in thought. I took the opportunity to whisper urgently to my parents, "We should go. Now!" Before I could finish my plea, the man's quiet voice drifted toward us, cutting through the stillness. "You shouldn't be here this late." I recoiled at the sound, fear coursing through my veins as Dad stood to confront him. "Everything all right?" "We're just leaving," he said, an edge of challenge lacing his tone. The stranger didn't respond, didn't move. Instead, his eyes swept over our picnic, lingering on the remnants of our day, a half-eaten sandwich, an empty soda can. It was the scrutiny of a predator sizing up prey, and I felt my insides twist. The first stars began to twinkle above us, distant and cold, and the atmosphere thickened with an unspoken tension. I felt the urge to flee, to take my family and run as far from this man as possible, but something rooted me in place. Curiosity mingled with dread, and I couldn't help but stare at him, waiting for the next move. Suddenly, the stranger took a step back, turning away from us completely. "You should go," he murmured, and this time the warning seemed urgent, laced with a hidden terror. My heart raced as I exchanged frantic glances with my parents, a silent conversation swirling between us. Should we listen? Should we leave? Before we could decide, the man moved away, into the shadows, vanishing just as rapidly as he had appeared. But our reprieve was short-lived. The sound of crunching gravel brought my attention to our car parked not far from the lake. My dad turned to retrieve the cooler, and I watched, frozen with dread, as he began moving toward it. Something deep within me screamed for him to stop. "Dad, wait!" I shouted, but the warning came too late. When he reached the car, I saw a glint of metal in the fading light. The door was ajar, the lock visibly tampered with, and suddenly I could taste the fear in the air. It wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. "Hey! Get away from there," my dad shouted, rushing back to the vehicle. But the man was gone, swallowed by darkness, and all that remained was the sinking feeling that we had been marked. My mom's hand tightened around mine, a fragile connection in the encroaching terror that threatened to consume us. We stood together, eyes locked on the void where the stranger had stood, clinging to the flickering embers of light from our picnic, knowing that night had only just begun.